The Alpha, King's greatest mistake, rejecting the one who would destroy him. They called her weak. They laughed when he threw her away. But what he didn't know, was that rejecting Nixara Vale wasn't an ending. It was an awakening. Tonight, I'm bringing you the story of a woman who went from being publicly humiliated and left to die in the frozen wilds to becoming the most feared force in the kingdom. This is about revenge, power, and the price of underestimating someone. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments, hit that like button, and stay until the end, because this ending will leave you speechless. The Grand Hall of Shadowmere reeked of blood, smoke, and alpha dominance. Nixara Vale stood in the center of it all, her bare feet cold against the ancient stone floor, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs and spill out onto the ground. Around her, hundreds of wolves, alphas, betas, enforcers, courtiers, nobles who'd traveled from every corner of the northern territories, watched with eyes that glowed faintly in the torchlight. The air hummed with expectation, with anticipation, with barely concealed cruelty. This was supposed to be her night, the bonding rite, the sacred ceremony where fated mates sealed their connection before the gods and the pack, where two souls became one under the light of the full moon, where she, Nixara Vale, nobody, orphan, lowest-ranked wolf in the entire kingdom, would stand beside Alpha King Darius Kane and be named his queen. Except Darius wasn't looking at her like a mate. He was looking at her like a mistake he needed to correct. Nixara Vale. His voice rolled through the hall like thunder across a mountain range, deep and commanding and utterly absolute, the kind of voice that made wolves drop to their knees without thinking, without even wanting to resist. He stood on the raised platform in front of the obsidian throne, tall and devastating in his black ceremonial armor that caught the firelight like dragon scales, his dark hair falling just past his jaw, his silver eyes cold as winter steel, cold as the glaciers that bordered the northern edge of his kingdom. Nixara forced herself to meet his gaze, forced herself not to tremble, not to show weakness, not to give the court any more ammunition than they already had. She'd spent 3 months preparing for this moment, 3 months being tutored in court etiquette by stern-faced women who looked at her like she was dirt they'd stepped in. 3 months learning to walk in ceremonial gowns, to hold her head high, to speak without her voice shaking. 3 months believing this was real. "Yes, my king," she said quietly, and hated how small her voice sounded in the vast hall. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd, soft, mocking, like the hiss of snakes in tall grass. She felt it like needles against her skin, each chuckle a tiny blade that cut just deep enough to remind her she didn't belong here, had never belonged here, would never belong here, no matter what the fated bond said. Darius stepped down from the platform, moving toward her with the slow, deliberate grace of a predator circling wounded prey. The bond between them pulsed faintly in her chest, a golden thread she'd felt since the moment their eyes first met 3 months ago at the spring gathering. It had been overwhelming then. Beautiful. Terrifying. The kind of connection that made her believe, for the first time in her miserable life, that maybe she was worth something, that maybe the gods hadn't completely forgotten about her. She'd grown up in the servant quarters of the palace, daughter of a kitchen worker who died giving birth to her, raised by various staff members who tolerated her existence but never quite accepted her. She'd scrubbed floors, hauled water, tended fires, and tried to make herself invisible because invisible meant safe. Invisible meant the higher-ranking wolves didn't notice you, didn't decide you'd make good entertainment, didn't use you as a punching bag when they were bored. But then the bond had snapped into place, right in the middle of the spring gathering, and suddenly everyone noticed her. Suddenly she mattered. Suddenly she was somebody. Now it felt like a noose tightening around her throat. "You stand before this court," Darius said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, bouncing off the vaulted ceilings and the stone pillars carved with the faces of ancient wolf kings, "as my fated mate, chosen by the gods, bound by blood and soul." Nixara nodded. Her throat was too tight to speak. She could feel the weight of every eye on her, could smell the mixture of curiosity and contempt rolling off the assembled wolves in waves. Some of them had been kind to her over the past 3 months, in a distant, patronizing way. Most had simply ignored her, waiting to see if she'd actually make it to this ceremony or if something would happen to prevent such an unsuitable match. She could see Lady Seraphine Ashcroft standing near the throne, beautiful and poised in her crimson gown, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes sharp as broken glass. Seraphine had been Darius's constant companion since childhood, the daughter of his father's most trusted advisor, groomed from birth to stand beside the throne. Everyone had expected them to bond. Everyone had been shocked when the fated connection had sparked between Darius and a nobody servant girl instead. Seraphine hadn't been shocked. She'd been furious, and she'd been whispering in Darius's ear every day since. Darius stopped 3 feet away from Nyxara, close enough that she could smell the cedar and smoke and mountain air on his skin, close enough that she could see the muscle ticking in his jaw, the slight flare of his nostrils, the way his hands were clenched at his sides like he was restraining himself from doing something violent. And yet, he continued, his tone sharpening like a blade being drawn from its sheath, "You are weak." The word hit her like a physical blow, like a fist to the sternum that knocked all the air from her lungs. Gasps echoed through the hall, then silence, heavy and suffocating and absolutely damning. Nyxara's hands curled into fists at her sides, her nails biting into her palms hard enough to draw blood. "What? You heard me." Darius's eyes raked over her, cold and dismissive, taking in her thin frame, her lack of muscle, the way she stood like she was trying to make herself smaller. "You have no strength, no power, no alpha blood running through your veins. You can barely shift without collapsing from exhaustion. Your wolf is practically non-existent. You're an omega at best, a liability at worst, a burden this kingdom cannot afford to carry." Her pulse roared in her ears, drowning out everything else. She could feel the bond between them twisting, writhing, confused and hurt, and desperately trying to understand why her mate was saying these things. "Darius, what are you talking about? The bond. The bond is irrelevant." His voice was flat, final. "What matters is strength. What matters is the ability to lead, to protect, to inspire fear and respect in our enemies. What matters is producing heirs who can continue this bloodline without diluting it into nothing. And you?" He looked her up and down one more time, his lip curling slightly. "You can't provide any of that." "That's not—" Nyxara's voice cracked, desperation bleeding through despite her best efforts to hold it back. "You don't know what I can—" "I know exactly what you can and can't do. I've had you watched, evaluated, tested. Every day for the past 3 months, my advisors have been monitoring you, measuring your abilities, assessing your potential." He gestured toward a group of elderly wolves standing near the left side of the hall, the Council of Elders, the ones who'd been so cold during her etiquette lessons. "They all agree. You are fundamentally unsuited to be queen. You would weaken this kingdom at a time when we need strength more than ever." Nyxara felt like the ground was opening up beneath her feet. "You've been testing me this whole time?" "Of course. Did you think I would bind myself to someone without ensuring they were worthy?" Darius's expression didn't change. "The fated bond is powerful, but it's not infallible. It's a tool, nothing more. And sometimes the gods make mistakes." "The gods don't make mistakes," Nyxara whispered, her voice shaking now, all her careful composure crumbling. "The bond exists for a reason. The bond exists because of some ancient magic we barely understand. It doesn't mean you're qualified to rule. It doesn't mean you're strong enough to survive in this world." He took a step back, putting distance between them, severing the physical proximity that the bond craved. "I will not shackle this kingdom to weakness. I will not allow my bloodline to be tainted by mediocrity. I will not condemn future generations to the fragility that stands before us now." "Darius, please." Tears were threatening now, hot and humiliating behind her eyes. "Please just listen to me. I can learn. I can get stronger. Give me a chance. I've given you 3 months. That's more than generous." He turned away from her, addressing the court instead, his back straight and unyielding. "I, Darius Kane, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, conqueror of the Shadow Peak Mountains, lord of the Frostlands and keeper of the ancient pacts, formally and irrevocably reject Nyxara Vale as my mate, my queen, and my equal. I sever this bond before the gods in this court. Let it be witnessed. Let it be known. Let it be done." The bond screamed. It wasn't a sound. It was a sensation, a tearing deep in her chest like someone had reached through her ribs and was pulling her heart out through her spine. Nyxara doubled over, clutching her sternum as pain exploded through her entire body, like lightning striking the same spot over and over and over. It felt like her ribs were being pried apart by invisible hands, like something molten and jagged was tearing through her veins, like every nerve ending in her body had been set on fire and doused in acid simultaneously. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but feel the bond dying, thrashing, fighting against the rejection with everything it had. Around her, the court erupted into chaos and commentary. Pathetic. Did you see her face? I knew she wasn't worthy. Omega trash. The king made the right choice. She's collapsing already. Imagine if she'd actually become queen. My daughter would have been a far better match. This is what happens when you reach above your station. Should have stayed in the kitchens where she belonged. Nyxara fell to her knees, the impact against the stone barely registering through the agony, tearing her apart from the inside. Her vision swam, dark spots dancing at the edges, her peripheral vision narrowing to a tunnel. The bond writhed inside her like a living thing, refusing to break cleanly, refusing to let go, clawing and screaming and fighting against the rejection with a desperation that bordered on madness. She could feel Darius on the other end of it, cold, unyielding, resolute, his will like an iron wall slamming down between them, cutting her off, pushing her away, forcing the bond to die even as it begged for mercy. He didn't even look back at her. "Remove her from my sight," he said flatly, already turning toward the throne as if she'd ceased to exist the moment the words left his mouth. "Take her beyond the gates. I don't want to see her face again." Two enforcers materialized from the shadows. Massive wolves in human form, their faces impassive, their hands rough and uncaring as they grabbed her by the arms and hauled her to her feet. Nyxara's legs barely held her weight. Her body felt like it belonged to someone else, disconnected and unresponsive, every muscle trembling with shock and pain. She tried to speak, tried to scream, tried to do anything but be dragged away like garbage. But all that came out was a broken, gasping sob that made the courtiers laugh harder. "Wait." A woman's voice cut through the noise, sharp and amused and dripping with false sweetness that didn't even try to hide the cruelty underneath. Nyxara's head lolled to the side. Through her blurred vision, she saw her, Lady Seraphine Ashcroft, stepping forward from her place near the throne, her crimson gown trailing behind her like a river of blood, her dark hair swept up in an elaborate style that probably took 3 servants an hour to achieve. She looked down at Nyxara with a smile that didn't reach her ice-blue eyes, a smile that said she'd been waiting for this moment, savoring it. "Don't just throw her out like common refuse," Seraphine purred, her voice carrying across the hall with practiced ease, pitched to sound reasonable and concerned when it was anything but. That would be too merciful, too quick. She came here thinking she could be queen, thinking she could stand beside our king as an equal. That kind of arrogance needs to be corrected, permanently. A murmur of agreement rippled through the court, excited, eager, hungry for humiliation and blood. "What do you suggest, Lady Ashcroft?" one of the elders asked, his ancient voice raspy with interest. Seraphine's smile widened. "Mark her, brand her with the symbol of rejection. Let everyone in the kingdom know what happens to wolves who reach above their station, who dare to think they can claim what doesn't belong to them. Let it be a warning to others who might harbor similar delusions." The murmur grew louder, more enthusiastic. Several wolves were nodding, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. Darius considered the suggestion for exactly 3 seconds, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once. "Do it." The enforcers dragged Nyxara toward the center of the hall, their grip bruising, their movements efficient and utterly without mercy. They forced her to her knees again on the same spot where she'd stood moments before, full of hope and naive faith. One of them, a scarred brute with dead eyes, yanked her head back by her hair, exposing the vulnerable line of her throat. "No," Nyxara whispered, her voice hoarse and breaking, barely audible over the excited chatter of the court. "No, please, please don't do this." Nobody listened. The branding iron was already glowing red-hot in the brazier, the metal hissing and spitting as one of the enforcers pulled it free. The symbol at its end blazed orange-white in the torchlight. A broken wolf, split down the middle, the mark of the rejected, the exiled, the unwanted. It was an old punishment, rarely used anymore, reserved for the worst offenders. reserved for people who needed to be reminded of their shame every day for the rest of their lives. Hold her still, the enforcer with the brand said, his voice completely neutral, like he was discussing the weather. The one gripping her hair tightened his hold, forcing her head to the side, stretching the skin of her neck taut. Please, Nixara sobbed, all pride abandoned now, reduced to pure animal fear. Please, I'll leave. I'll go. You'll never see me again. Just please don't. They pressed the brand to her throat. Nixara screamed. The smell of burning flesh filled the air, acrid and nauseating, mixing with the smoke from the torches and the incense that had been burned earlier in the ceremony. Pain whited out her vision, her hearing, everything. It was worse than the bond breaking. This was physical, immediate, undeniable, the kind of pain that rewrote your nervous system, that changed something fundamental in how your brain processed sensation. Her wolf recoiled inside her, whimpering and crying and retreating into the furthest corner of her mind, trying to escape the agony that had no escape, curling up into a ball and going silent in a way that felt permanent. The smell was the worst part. The knowledge that it was her flesh burning, her skin bubbling and charring, her body being permanently marked with a symbol that would tell everyone who saw her exactly what she was. Worthless, rejected, a mistake. Somewhere in the distance, through the ringing in her ears and the white-hot pain, she heard laughter, applause. The sound of wolves howling their approval like this was entertainment, like her suffering was a spectacle put on for their amusement. When they finally pulled the iron away, after what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, Nixara collapsed onto the cold stone floor, gasping and shaking, her body convulsing with shock. Blood and clear fluid seeped from the brand, running down her neck and soaking into the fabric of the ceremonial dress they'd forced her to wear, the beautiful white gown that was supposed to symbolize new beginnings. Let that mark remind you, Darius said from somewhere above her, his voice distant and distorted through the ringing in her ears. Of your place, of what you are, of what you will always be. Nothing. The enforcers grabbed her again, dragging her toward the massive doors at the far end of the hall. She didn't fight, couldn't fight. Her body was done, her wolf was broken. Her spirit was shattered into so many pieces she couldn't imagine ever putting them back together. The court parted before them like she was diseased, wolves pulling back in disgust and disdain, some of them spitting on her as she passed, others making crude gestures and shouting insults. Omega whore! Should have known your place. The king's too good for trash like you. Go die in the Frostlands where you belong. The last thing she heard before they dragged her out of the hall was Seraphine's voice, speaking quietly to Darius but pitched just loud enough for Nixara to catch. You made the right choice, my king. She would have been your ruin. Now you're free to choose a real queen, someone worthy of standing beside you. And Darius's response casual and unbothered. Indeed. Prepare the chambers, Seraphine. We have much to discuss. Then the doors slammed shut, cutting off the light and warmth and sound, leaving Nixara in the cold darkness of the outer corridor with only the enforcers and her pain for company. They didn't even bother walking her to the gates properly. Halfway across the outer courtyard, they just threw her into the snow and kept walking, their job done, their interest in her fate completely absent. Nixara hit the ground hard, her body too weak to catch herself, too damaged to do anything but crumple like a discarded doll. The cold bit into her skin immediately, vicious and unforgiving, seeping through the thin ceremonial dress that was never meant to be worn outside, never meant to face the brutal reality of a Frostland's winter night. She lay there for a long time, staring up at the stars, watching her breath fog in the air. She should get up, should move, should try to find shelter before the temperature dropped even further. But what was the point? The brand on her neck throbbed with every heartbeat, a constant reminder. The bond in her chest was gone, leaving behind a hollow void that felt worse than the pain. Her wolf was silent, maybe dead, maybe just broken beyond repair. She had nothing, was nothing, would always be nothing. The gates of Shadowmere loomed behind her, massive and imposing and utterly final. Beyond them lay the Frostlands, the frozen expanse where exiled wolves went to die, where the temperature dropped so low at night that flesh froze solid, where predators that made normal wolves look like puppies hunted anything foolish enough to venture into their territory. Nobody survived exile in the Frostlands. That was the point. Nixara closed her eyes, the cold seeping deeper, making her fingers and toes go numb. Maybe it would be quick. Maybe she'd just fall asleep and not wake up. That seemed merciful compared to being eaten alive or freezing to death slowly. She was so tired, so broken, so done. But then, something else. Deep in her chest, deeper than the bond had ever been, deeper than her wolf, deeper than her heart, deeper than anything she'd ever felt before. A pulse. Faint, hesitant, like a dying ember buried under ash. Nixara's eyes opened slightly, confusion cutting through the fog of pain and shock. What? The pulse came again. Stronger this time, hotter. Her hand moved to her sternum without conscious thought, her frozen fingers pressing against the torn fabric of her dress. The pulse flickered, grew, began to spread. Heat bloomed in her chest, radiating outward, chasing away the cold that had been seeping into her bones. Not the warmth of the fated bond, that had felt golden, gentle, right. This was different, older, darker, angrier. This felt like waking up after being drugged. This felt like remembering something you'd been forced to forget. The pulse ignited. Nixara gasped as power surged through her body, raw and primal and absolutely terrifying. It felt like lightning in her veins, like molten metal replacing her blood, like every cell in her body was being rewritten at a fundamental level. Pain ripped through her, different from the rejection, different from the brand, sharper, hotter, deeper, like something ancient and vast and incomprehensibly powerful was waking up after sleeping for 1,000 years, after being buried, after being locked away. She screamed, her back arching off the snow, her fingers clawing at the ground as the power surged higher, hotter, stronger, refusing to be contained. The snow around her began to melt, steam rising into the night air. Her skin burned, her bones ached. Her blood sang with a frequency she'd never heard before, a rhythm that felt older than the kingdom, older than the wolves themselves, older than everything she'd ever known. And then she heard it. A voice, low and ancient and utterly inhuman, speaking directly into her mind with the weight of eons behind it. Finally awake, finally free. Nixara's eyes snapped open. They glowed molten gold, bright enough to cast shadows on the surrounding snow, bright enough to make the stars above seem dim by comparison. They tried to bury us, the voice continued, resonating in her skull like a second heartbeat. They tried to lock us away. They tried to breed us out of existence. But you can't kill what runs deeper than blood. You can't destroy what was here before the first wolf drew breath. What? Nixara's voice came out raspy, broken. What are you? I am you. The part they tried to erase. The power your ancestors hid because it made them afraid. The legacy that was supposed to die with your mother. The world tilted. Nixara's mother had died giving birth to her. Everyone knew that, but nobody had ever told her anything about her mother's past, her lineage, why a servant woman had ended up in the palace kitchens in the first place. Your mother was the last of the Valafire line, the voice said, reading her thoughts. An ancient bloodline that ruled these lands before the wolves, before the packs, before the alphas built their kingdoms on the ashes of what came before. She hid here, thinking she could escape what she was, thinking she could live a normal life. But power like ours doesn't disappear. It sleeps. It waits. It passes to the next generation. Valafire, Nixara whispered, the name feeling strange and right on her tongue. Fire-blooded, flame-born. The ones who could call the sun itself to their hands. The ones who made kings kneel and kingdoms burn. The voice grew stronger, hungrier. And now you've been rejected, cast out, marked as worthless. They've given us exactly what we needed, freedom from their rules, their expectations, their chains. Now we can become what we were always meant to be. The power in her chest pulsed again, and this time Nixara felt it responding to her emotions, to the rage simmering under her shock, to the humiliation burning in her gut, to the absolute fury that Darius had thrown her away like trash. Heat gathered in her palms. She looked down and watched flames dance across her skin, blue-white and impossibly beautiful, hot enough that the snow beneath her hands melted instantly, revealing the dark earth underneath. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something else entirely. Power. Real power. Not the fated bond that could be rejected, not the wolf that could be broken. Something that belonged to her and her alone. something nobody could take away. Good, the voice purred. Now get up. We have a kingdom to burn. Nixara didn't remember passing out. When consciousness returned, dragging her up from darkness like hands pulling her from deep water, the sky had changed. Dawn was coming, maybe an hour away, turning the eastern horizon from black to deep purple to the faintest hint of pink. She sat up slowly, her body responding in ways it never had before. The pain from the brand was still there, a dull throb at the side of her neck, but it was distant now, pushed to the background by the power humming under her skin. The snow had melted in a perfect circle around her, 20 feet in diameter. Steam rose from the bare ground, from the dead grass underneath, from her own skin, which was completely dry despite having been lying in snow. Nixara looked at her hands. They were steady, unmarked except for the dirt under her nails. But she could feel it, power, coiled beneath her skin like a sleeping dragon that had just opened one eye. She could feel the voice too, quieter now but still present, a second consciousness sharing space in her mind. What do I call you? She thought. I am you, the part that was buried. But if you need a name, call me Ignis, the fire that was always yours. Nixara pushed herself to her feet. Her legs didn't shake. Her vision was crystal clear. She could see individual needles on pine trees 100 yards away, could hear the heartbeat of animals in the forest, could smell things she'd never been able to smell before. Her senses had been sharper than a normal human's before. She was still part wolf, even with her broken, weak wolf spirit. But this was different. This was supernatural on a completely different level. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness. Nixara's head whipped around, her body tensing, muscles responding with a speed and precision that should have been impossible. 3 figures stepped out of the tree line about 50 yards away, materializing from the shadows like ghosts. 2 men and a woman, all dressed in dark leather and fur designed for hunting, all armed with silver weapons that caught the faint pre-dawn light. Bounty hunters. The woman stepped forward, her teeth filed to points in the old way, her eyes scanning Nixara with the cold assessment of someone evaluating merchandise. She grinned, the expression sharp and predatory. Well, 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 the rejected queen herself. Didn't think you'd last this long out here. Thought we'd be collecting a frozen corpse by now. The king's going to be disappointed. He was very specific that you shouldn't suffer. Quick death, he said. Merciful. She laughed, the sound harsh. But I say if we're getting paid anyway, might as well have a little fun first. The taller of the 2 men spun a wicked-looking knife in his hand, the silver blade humming. 50 gold pieces for your head. 75 if we bring back the body intact. More if we bring proof you begged first. The other man, shorter, stockier, with scars crossing his face, cracked his knuckles. I say we take our time. Make it last. Nobody's going to find her out here anyway. They started forward, confident, already dividing up the money in their heads. Nixara stood perfectly still, watching them approach, feeling the power in her chest respond to the threat, to the rage building in her gut, to the simple fact that these people had been sent by Darius to finish what the rejection started, to erase her completely. Show them, Ignis whispered. Show them what happens when you hunt fire. The woman reached her first, moving with the supernatural speed that came with the wolf shift, her clawed hand reaching for Nixara's throat. Nixara moved. She didn't think, didn't plan, didn't hesitate. She just moved, and her body responded like it had been training for this moment its entire life. Her hand shot out, catching the woman's wrist mid-strike. The hunter's eyes widened in shock. Shock that Nixara had moved fast enough to intercept, shock at the strength in her grip, shock at the heat radiating from her palm. What? Flames erupted from Nixara's hand, blue-white and impossibly hot, racing up the woman's arm like liquid fire. The hunter screamed, trying to pull away, but Nixara held her firm, watched with a strange detachment as the flames consumed flesh and muscle and bone, reducing the woman's arm to ash in seconds. The fire spread to her torso, her face, her entire body, moving with a speed and hunger that seemed almost alive. In less than 5 seconds, the woman was gone, reduced to a pile of gray ash that the wind immediately began to scatter. The 2 men stumbled back, their confidence evaporating, their faces pale with shock and the first stirrings of genuine terror. She's Roy's witch. She's a God's damned witch. The shorter one turned to run. Nixara raised her hand, feeling the power respond to her will, feeling it shape itself according to her intent. Fire shot from her palm like a spear, crossing the distance in a heartbeat, punching through the man's back and erupting from his chest in a shower of flames. He dropped without a sound, his body burning from the inside out. The tall one with the knife was already shifting, his body rippling and expanding, bones breaking and reforming as he transformed into his wolf form, a gray beast easily the size of a small horse. He lunged, jaws open wide, going for her throat. Nixara caught him mid-leap. Her hands closed in his fur, and flames poured from her palms like water from a broken dam. The wolf howled, thrashing in her grip with desperate animal panic. But she held him steady, her expression cold, her eyes meeting his as the fire consumed him. When she finally let go, he hit the ground as nothing but ash and blackened bones. Nixara stood alone in the circle of melted snow, her hands still glowing faintly with embers that danced across her knuckles like fireflies, steam rising from her skin. She looked at the 3 piles of ash, felt nothing. No guilt, no horror, no regret. They had come to kill her. She had killed them first. That was all there was to it. Good, Ignis purred in her mind. Now you're beginning to understand. Mercy is for people who have the luxury of safety. We are not safe. We are hunted. And when you're hunted, you become the hunter, or you die. Nixara flexed her fingers, watching the flames dance. The power felt natural now, like breathing, like her heartbeat, like it had always been there, just waiting for her to stop being afraid of it. She turned toward the forest, toward the vast expanse of the Frostlands stretching out before her. 3 months ago, this place would have terrified her. Now it was going to teach her how to survive, how to hunt, how to become something that Darius Kane and his entire kingdom would learn to fear. She smiled, cold and sharp, and utterly without mercy. The girl who had knelt in that hall was dead. And the woman walking into the Frostlands? She was just getting started. The Frostlands didn't forgive mistakes. Nixara learned that lesson on her 3rd day, when she nearly walked into a frost worm nest hidden beneath what looked like solid ground. The ice had given way under her feet, and only her new reflexes, faster, sharper, powered by something that wasn't quite wolf anymore, had saved her from plunging into a pit filled with serpents the size of tree trunks, their scales white as bone, their venom capable of freezing blood solid in seconds. She'd scrambled back, heart hammering, and watched as one of the creatures surfaced, its milky eyes fixing on her with predatory interest. For a moment they'd stared at each other across the broken ice. Then Nixara had raised her hand, let the fire bloom across her palm, and the worm had retreated into the darkness below. Message received. She was learning fast because she had to. The Frostlands were filled with things that wanted to kill her, ice bears that could smell prey from miles away, shadow cats that hunted in packs and moved like liquid darkness, and worse things she didn't have names for yet. Things that howled in the night. Things that left tracks in the snow that were too big, too wrong, too ancient. But she was also learning that she could kill them back. The power that Ignis had awakened, the Valifier legacy, whatever the hell that meant, was growing stronger every day. She could feel it settling into her bones, rewriting things at a fundamental level. Her body was changing, getting stronger, faster. Her senses were sharper than any wolf's. She could see in complete darkness now, could hear heartbeats from 100 yards away, could smell fear and aggression and lies. And the fire responded to her will like it was part of her, like it had always been waiting for permission to burn. She'd made camp, if you could call it that, in a cave system she'd found on the 5th day. Deep enough to protect her from the worst of the wind, high enough that most predators wouldn't bother climbing, with multiple exits in case she needed to run. The floor was covered in the pelts of things she'd killed, and in the corner, a small pile of supplies she'd scavenged from dead hunters. Because they kept coming. Not as many as the first week. Word was clearly spreading that hunting the rejected queen was a good way to end up as ash. But enough. Desperate mercenaries who thought the bounty was worth the risk. Cocky young wolves trying to make a name for themselves. Enforcers sent by the crown who believed their training and superior numbers would make the difference. They were all wrong. Nixara sat near the mouth of the cave, watching the sun set over the frozen wasteland, her hands wrapped around a crude cup made from carved stone. She'd filled it with melted snow and heated it with her own body heat until it was warm enough to drink. Not comfortable, but better than eating ice. We should move soon, Ignis said in her mind, the voice that was her but also wasn't, the ancient consciousness that had been locked away in her bloodline. The hunters will figure out where we're staying eventually. Better to stay mobile. I know. Nyxara took another sip of the lukewarm water. But I need to understand this power first. Need to know what I'm capable of before you what? March on Shadowmere? Burn it to the ground? Kill everyone who laughed while they branded you? Yes. The word hung in her mind, simple and absolute. Good. I was worried you'd go soft. Start thinking about mercy and forgiveness and all that garbage they teach servants to keep them compliant. Nyxara's jaw tightened. I'm done being compliant, done being weak, done being the person they could throw away. Then we need to test your limits. See how far this power can go. Because right now you can burn a few hunters. But a kingdom, an army, the Alpha King himself? That's going to take more than party tricks. Before Nyxara could respond, she heard it. The sound of footsteps crunching through snow, multiple sets trying to be quiet and failing. She set down the cup and stood, her body tensing, power already gathering in her palms. 6 figures emerged from the tree line below her cave, moving in a tactical formation that screamed military training. They were dressed in the black and silver of Shadowmere's elite guard, their weapons drawn, their eyes scanning the rocks. One of them, a woman with short blonde hair and a scar running through her left eyebrow, gestured to the others, pointing toward the cave entrance. Nyxara stepped out where they could see her. The leader's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. Nyxara Vale. By order of King Darius Kane, you are to be executed for crimes against the crown. Surrender now, and we'll make it quick. Nyxara almost laughed. Crimes against the crown? What crimes? Being rejected? Getting branded and thrown out to die? Killing royal enforcers, another one said, a tall man with a voice like gravel. Murdering bounty hunters operating under legal contracts. Using forbidden magic. Existing as a threat to the kingdom's stability. So defending myself is a crime now? You're not defending yourself, the leader said coldly. You're slaughtering people. We found the remains. Ash piles, burned corpses. You're using dark magic, witchcraft that was outlawed centuries ago for good reason. They're afraid, Ignis whispered. Good. Fear's the beginning of respect. I didn't ask for this, Nyxara said, her voice steady. I didn't ask to be rejected. I didn't ask to be hunted. All I did was survive what you people threw at me. And now you're mad that I'm not dead? It doesn't matter what you asked for, the leader replied. What matters is what you are, a threat, an abomination, and we've been sent to eliminate you. The 6 enforcers spread out, surrounding the base of the rocky outcrop, cutting off escape routes with practiced efficiency. Nyxara watched them move, felt the power in her chest responding to the threat, heating her blood. Last chance, the leader called up. Surrender or die. Nyxara's hands burst into flame, blue-white fire that cast dancing shadows across the rocks. I choose option 3, she said quietly. Then she dropped into the middle of them. The fight was brutal and short. The first enforcer barely had time to raise his sword before Nyxara's burning hand closed around his throat. He died screaming, his body igniting from the inside out. She spun, ducking under a silver blade, her other hand shooting out to catch the second attacker by the wrist. Flames raced up his arm, and he dropped, thrashing. The leader shifted into her wolf form mid-leap, a massive silver beast with eyes like chips of ice. She was fast, faster than the bounty hunters, faster than most of the enforcers Nyxara had killed so far. But not fast enough. Nyxara met her in midair, their bodies colliding with enough force to crack stone. They hit the ground rolling, claws and fire and teeth and desperation. The wolf's jaws snapped inches from Nyxara's face, close enough that she could smell the meat on its breath. Nyxara grabbed the wolf's muzzle with both hands and poured fire directly into its mouth. The beast's eyes went wide with shock and agony. It tried to pull away, but Nyxara held firm, watching as flames erupted from its throat, its eyes, its ears, consuming it from within. When she finally let go, the wolf collapsed into ash. The remaining 3 enforcers were already running, their training abandoned in the face of something they couldn't fight. couldn't understand, couldn't defeat. Nyxara let them go. She needed them to report back, needed Darius to know that his hunters were failing, needed the fear to spread. She stood among the ash piles and burning corpses, her hands still glowing, her breathing steady despite the violence. "You're getting better," Ignis observed. "Faster, more controlled, but you're still holding back." Holding back? Nyxara looked at the destruction around her. "I just killed 6 trained soldiers in under a minute." "Yes, and you could have done it in 10 seconds if you'd really let go. You're still afraid of the power, still treating it like something separate from yourself." "But it's not. It's you, the real you. The you that was buried under years of being told to be small, to be quiet, to be weak." Nyxara flexed her fingers, watching the flames dance. "If I let go completely, what happens? We find out exactly how powerful we really are." A sound cut through the night, a horn, low and resonant, echoing across the frostlands from the direction of Shadowmere. 3 short blasts. A pause. 3 more. The signal for a full mobilization. Nyxara's eyes narrowed. "What's that?" "That," Ignis said grimly, "is the sound of Darius Kane deciding you're too dangerous to leave alive. That's the war horn. He's not sending hunters anymore. He's sending an army." So, by dawn, Nyxara could see them. Hundreds of wolves, maybe more, spreading out across the frostlands in organized units. They had supply wagons, siege equipment, war beasts chained and snarling. This wasn't a hunting party. This was an extermination force. She watched from a high ridge, her enhanced vision picking out details that should have been impossible to see from this distance. She recognized some of the commanders, veteran soldiers who'd served under Darius for decades, alphas who'd fought in the border wars, enforcers who were legendary for their brutality. And leading them, riding a black horse that looked like it had been bred for war, was someone Nyxara recognized immediately. Seraphine Ashcroft. Even from miles away, even dressed in battle armor instead of court gowns, Seraphine was unmistakable. She sat straight in the saddle, her dark hair pulled back in a severe braid, a silver sword hanging at her hip. "The king sent his favorite to finish what he started," Ignis observed. "Interesting choice. She must have volunteered." Of course she did. Nyxara's hands clenched into fists. "She's the reason this happened. I heard her whispering to him, poisoning his mind against me for months. She wanted me gone so she could take my place." "Then let's give her exactly what she came for. A fight. Against an army? You're thinking too small. You're thinking like prey, like someone who needs to run and hide. But you're not prey anymore. You're a Valifier. Your ancestors didn't run from armies. They burned them." Nyxara watched the forces below setting up camp, establishing perimeters, sending out scout patrols. "I can't fight all of them. Not yet. I'm strong, but I'm not. You won't fight them all. You'll fight their leader, cut off the head, and the body falls apart. And if you do it publicly, if you make an example of Seraphine Ashcroft, you send a message that even Darius Kane can't ignore." "That's insane." "Probably. But staying here waiting for them to corner you is guaranteed suicide. At least this way we go out fighting." Nyxara stood on the ridge for a long moment, weighing her options. Run deeper into the frostlands, try to outlast them, find a place to hide and hope they gave up eventually, keep picking off stragglers until they retreated. Or do what Ignis suggested. Walk right into their camp and challenge their commander. It was insane, reckless, the kind of thing that got you killed in spectacular fashion, but it was also the last thing they'd expect. And Nyxara was tired of running. "Fine," she said out loud. "We do it your way, but if this gets me killed, I'm blaming you. If this gets you killed, you won't be around to blame anyone. Now stop whining and let's go make history." "What?" Nyxara walked into the camp just after sunset. She didn't sneak, didn't hide, just walked straight through the perimeter like she owned the place, her hands burning with barely contained fire, her eyes glowing gold in the gathering darkness. The first patrol spotted her when she was 50 yards from the outer tents. 3 wolves in human form, armed with spears and silver-edged blades. "Halt! Identify yourself!" Nyxara kept walking. The guards exchanged glances, then raised their weapons. "I said halt!" She stopped 10 feet away from them, tilting her head slightly. "I'm here to see Lady Ashcroft. Tell her Nixara Vale would like a word. One of the guards actually laughed. You're the one we're hunting. You think we're just going to escort you to our commander? I think you're going to run back to your camp and tell Seraphine I'm here. Because if you try to stop me, I'll kill you. And if you run away without delivering my message, she'll kill you for cowardice. So really, you've only got one choice that keeps you breathing. The guard's smile faded. He looked at his companions, then back at Nixara, clearly trying to decide if she was bluffing. Nixara raised one hand, letting the flames intensify until they were bright enough to read by. Your move, she said softly. The guards broke and ran. Nixara followed at a leisurely pace, watching as chaos erupted through the camp. Soldiers scrambling for weapons, commanders shouting orders, wolves shifting into their animal forms, the organized military precision dissolving into controlled panic. By the time she reached the center of camp, there were easily 200 wolves surrounding her, weapons drawn, growling and snarling and ready to attack. And standing in front of the command tent, still pulling on her armored gloves, was Seraphine. She looked at Nixara with an expression that was half surprise, half grudging admiration. Well, Seraphine said, her voice carrying across the assembled soldiers. This is unexpected. I thought we'd have to hunt you down like the animal you are. Didn't think you'd deliver yourself to us. I'm not delivering myself, Nixara replied calmly. I'm issuing a challenge. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Seraphine's eyebrow rose. A challenge? You? The Omega who couldn't even shift properly, wants to challenge me? I challenge you to single combat. Right here, right now. If I win, your army withdraws and leaves me alone. If you win, they can do whatever they want with my body. The murmurs grew louder, more agitated. Seraphine studied her for a long moment, her ice-blue eyes calculating. Why would I accept? I have an army. I could order them to tear you apart right now. You could try, Nixara agreed, but you'd lose soldiers, a lot of them. And for what? The chance to kill one rejected Omega? Or you could fight me yourself, prove you're as strong as you think you are, and end this without wasting resources. And she's arrogant enough to take the bait, Ignis whispered. Watch. Seraphine's jaw tightened. She glanced at her officers, saw them watching, waiting for her decision. If she refused and ordered an attack, she'd look weak, afraid, like she needed an army to fight one woman. If she accepted and won, she'd cement her position as Darius's chosen, the strong alpha who'd defeated the witch. If she accepted and lost, but she wouldn't lose. Nixara could see that confidence in her eyes, that absolute certainty that she was superior in every way. Fine, Seraphine said, unbuckling her sword belt and handing it to an aide. Single combat, no weapons, no interference. To the death. She stepped forward, and the soldiers pulled back, forming a circle about 50 feet across. Nixara walked to the center, her hands still burning with low flames. Seraphine cracked her neck, rolled her shoulders, and smiled. I'm going to enjoy this. I've wanted to put you in your place since the moment Darius announced that ridiculous bond. You were always beneath him, beneath all of us, and now I get to prove it. Talk all you want, Nixara said quietly. It won't change what happens next. Seraphine shifted. Her body exploded outward, bones breaking and reforming, muscles expanding, fur erupting across her skin. In seconds, she'd transformed into a massive white wolf, easily 9 feet at the shoulder, her fangs like daggers, her eyes blazing with alpha power. She was beautiful, terrifying, everything an alpha wolf was supposed to be. The assembled soldiers howled their approval, the sound deafening. Nixara stood perfectly still, watching the wolf circle her, looking for an opening. Now, Ignis said, show them what you really are. Nixara closed her eyes and let go. The power that had been simmering under her skin, carefully controlled, deliberately restrained, roared to life like a wildfire that had been waiting for wind. Flames erupted across her entire body, blue-white and impossibly hot, bright enough to turn night into day. The snow within 20 feet melted instantly. The ground beneath her feet scorched black, and her eyes, when she opened them, burned like twin suns. The howling stopped. Silence fell across the camp, absolute and stunned. Seraphine's wolf form hesitated, ears flattening back, instinct warring with pride. Nixara smiled, and it was not a human expression. Come on then, she said, her voice layered with something older, darker, inhuman. Show me what an alpha can do. Seraphine lunged, jaws open wide, going for the throat. Nyxara caught her. Her burning hands closed on the wolf's muzzle, stopping the attack cold. Seraphine thrashed, trying to break free, claws raking Nyxara's sides and finding nothing but fire. You want to know why Darius rejected me? Nyxara asked, her voice conversational despite the struggling predator in her grip. It wasn't because I was weak. It was because you convinced him I was. You whispered in his ear, day after day, poisoning him against me, making him doubt the bond. The wolf's eyes widened. You took everything from me. My mate, my future, my place in the world. Nyxara's grip tightened, flames intensifying. So now I'm going to take something from you. She poured fire into the wolf's body, not to kill quickly like she'd done with the hunters, but slowly, letting it burn from the inside out, letting Seraphine feel every second of it. The wolf howled, a sound of pure agony that echoed across the frostlands. Around them, soldiers shifted nervously, hands on weapons, looking to their officers for orders that didn't come. Because what could they do? Rush in and break the terms of single combat? Attack the woman who was currently immolated in flames hot enough to melt steel? Seraphine's wolf form collapsed, shifting back to human as her strength failed. She lay on the scorched ground, her skin blistered and blackened, gasping for air. Nyxara knelt beside her, the flames on her hands dimming slightly. Tell Darius, she said softly, that I'm coming for him. Tell him that the girl he threw away is going to burn his kingdom to ash. Tell him that he should have killed me when he had the chance. Seraphine tried to speak, but only a wet, rasping sound came out. Nyxara stood, turning to face the assembled army, hundreds of wolves staring at her with expressions ranging from fear to awe to hatred. Anyone else want to try? She called out. No one moved, no one spoke. The only sound was the crackle of flames and Seraphine's labored breathing. This is the moment, Ignis said. This is where you decide who you're going to be. The girl who runs away, or the woman who makes them fear her name. Nyxara raised her voice, letting it carry across the camp. Tell your king that the Frostlands belong to me now. Tell him that any hunter who comes for me won't return. Tell him that Nyxara Vale is dead. She let the flames intensify, her body burning so bright that wolves had to look away. But the woman who survived his rejection? She smiled, cold and sharp, and absolutely without mercy. She's just getting started. Then she turned and walked out of the camp, through the circle of soldiers who parted before her like she was a wildfire they couldn't contain, leaving Seraphine broken and burned in the snow behind her. No one tried to stop her. No one dared. And as she disappeared into the darkness of the Frostlands, Nyxara heard it, the sound of an entire army realizing they'd been hunting the wrong kind of prey. The rejected queen was gone. In her place stood something far more dangerous. Word spread faster than wildfire. Within 2 days, every settlement, outpost, and village within 100 miles knew what had happened. The rejected queen had walked into an army camp, challenged their commander, and left Lady Seraphine Ashcroft broken and burned in the snow. The soldiers who'd witnessed it told the story in taverns and mess halls, their voices hushed, their eyes haunted. Some versions said Nyxara had grown wings of fire. Others claimed she'd turned into a demon. A few insisted she'd killed half the army before leaving, though that part wasn't true. She hadn't needed to kill anyone else. The message had been delivered, but the consequences were spreading in ways Nyxara hadn't anticipated. She was crouched in the skeletal remains of what had once been a trading post, picking through the wreckage for anything useful, when she heard the voices. Multiple people, moving through the snow with the careless noise of civilians rather than soldiers. Nyxara melted into the shadows. Her fire damped down to barely a flicker, watching as a group of 5 wolves emerged from the tree line. They were thin, ragged, dressed in mismatched furs and carrying makeshift weapons. Refugees, maybe. Or exiles. Heard she camped somewhere in this area, a young woman was saying, her breath fogging in the cold air. My cousin's friend saw her 3 days ago, said she was heading this direction. We don't even know if she'll help us, an older man argued, his face weathered and scarred. She might just kill us. You heard what she did to Ashcroft. Ashcroft deserved it, a third voice said. Another woman, middle-aged with a hard edge to her tone. She was the one leading the purges in the border towns, My sister died because of her orders. Nixara's interest sharpened. Purges? Stay quiet, Ignis advised. Listen first. The group stopped near the trading post ruins, looking around nervously. This place gives me the creeps, the young woman muttered. Everything gives you the creeps, Mara, the older man said, but not unkindly. We need to find shelter before nightfall. The temperature's already dropping. We need to find her, the hard-voiced woman insisted. If the stories are true, if she really has the power they say, she could help us. Could help all of us. Or she could burn us alive for bothering her. Then we burn. At least it'll be quick, unlike what's waiting for us back in Shadowmere. Nixara stepped out of the shadows, letting flames dance along her fingertips just enough to be visible. The group froze, hands going to their weapons, eyes wide. You're looking for me, Nixara said quietly. It wasn't a question. The young woman, Mara, nodded jerkily. Yes, we heard you were in the Frostlands, that you survived the rejection, that you fought an army and won. I didn't fight an army. I fought their commander, and I didn't win. I just didn't lose. Nixara studied them, taking in their malnourished frames, their desperate expressions. Why are you here? The hard-voiced woman stepped forward, despite the older man trying to pull her back. Because we need help. Because Darius Kane has declared martial law across the Northern Territories. Because anyone who questions him, anyone who speaks against him, anyone who doesn't show absolute loyalty is being arrested, or worse. Nixara's jaw tightened. What do you mean, worse? Executions, the woman said bluntly. Public ones. He's calling it purging the weakness from the pack. Started right after you were rejected. Said the kingdom needed to be strong, needed to eliminate anyone who couldn't contribute, anyone who was a burden. The older man nodded reluctantly. My son was killed for stealing bread. Bread. They hanged him in the town square as an example. He was 12. Mara's voice shook as she spoke. My family hid me when the enforcers came looking for undesirables. I'm deaf in one ear, got kicked by a horse when I was little. Under the new laws, that makes me defective, expendable. Nixara felt something cold settle in her stomach, something that had nothing to do with the temperature. How many has he killed? Hundreds, the hard-voiced woman said. Maybe more. It's hard to get accurate numbers because anyone who tries to keep track disappears. The Council of Elders supports it. Lady Ashcroft was the one implementing it, going town to town, selecting who lives and who dies. This is about you, Ignis said quietly. He's afraid. You challenged his power, proved his perfect alpha strength isn't so perfect after all. So now he's overcompensating, trying to prove he's still in control by controlling everything and everyone. I didn't want this. Doesn't matter what you wanted. It's happening anyway. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Nixara looked at the 5 refugees, saw the hope and fear warring in their expressions. Why come to me? I can't protect you. I'm barely surviving out here myself. You're the only one who stood up to him and lived, the hard-voiced woman said. You're the only one who's proven he can be beaten. If you came back, I'm not coming back, Nixara cut her off. I'm not leading a rebellion. I'm not saving anyone. I just want to be left alone. Then we're all dead anyway, Mara whispered. Because he won't stop. He'll keep killing until there's no one left but the strongest, the most loyal, the most willing to do whatever he says. That's not my problem. The words came out harsher than Nixara intended, but she meant them. She'd barely survived the past 3 weeks. She was still learning to control the power burning inside her. She wasn't a leader, wasn't a hero. She was just a girl who'd been thrown away and refused to die quietly. The hard-voiced woman's expression hardened. Fine. We'll find somewhere else to hide. Come on. She turned to leave, the others following reluctantly. Nixara watched them go, felt something twisting in her chest that might have been guilt. You can't save everyone, Ignis said. Focus on yourself, get stronger, then worry about revenge. But as the refugees disappeared into the trees, Nixara couldn't shake the image of a 12-year-old boy hanging in a town square for stealing bread. Couldn't stop hearing Mara's trembling voice explaining that being deaf in one ear made her expendable. Couldn't forget that all of this, the purges, the executions, the martial law, had started because of her, because she'd survived. Damn it, she muttered. Don't, Ignis warned. Don't let guilt drive your decisions. That's how you make mistakes. Maybe, but it's also how you stay human. She ran after them. The refugees had a camp, if you could call it that, in a canyon about 5 miles from the trading post. 37 people huddled in caves and under makeshift shelters, most of them injured or sick, all of them terrified. Nixara counted at least 5 children. "This is everyone?" she asked the hard-voiced woman, whose name turned out to be Kess. "Everyone who made it this far," Kess replied, stirring a pot of thin soup over a struggling fire. "We had 52 when we left the borderlands, lost 15 to exposure, cold, hunters. This is what's left." Nixara walked through the camp, feeling dozens of eyes tracking her movement, seeing the mixture of hope and suspicion on their faces. An old woman missing her left arm, a young man with a twisted leg that had healed wrong, a little girl with a port wine stain covering half her face, clutching a ragged doll. "They're all considered defective under the new laws," Kess said quietly. "All of them sentenced to death for being imperfect, for being weak." "This is insane," Nixara breathed. "This is Darius Kane showing the kingdom what happens when you reject him, when you prove he's not as all-powerful as he claims." Kess fixed her with a hard stare. "He's killing us to send you a message." The guilt twisted deeper. "It's not your fault," Ignis insisted. "You didn't make him a monster. You just revealed what he already was." "Maybe. But these people were suffering because of decisions Nixara had made, because she'd chosen to fight back instead of dying quietly in the snow. "What do you want from me?" she asked Kess. "Protection. Help. A chance." Kess gestured at the camp. "We can't survive out here on our own. We don't have your power, your strength. But if you were with us, if you helped us, helped you do what? Hide in the Frostlands forever? That's not living. That's just dying slowly." "Then what do you suggest?" Nixara didn't have an answer. She spent the next 3 days with the refugees, using her fire to keep them warm, hunting ice bears and shadow cats to feed them, burning away the worst of the infections that were spreading through the camp. She told herself it was temporary, that she was just making sure they were stable before she left, but the children kept looking at her like she was salvation. And the adults kept asking when she was going to lead them back to Shadowmere. And Kess kept pushing, relentless and sharp. "You can't hide out here forever," she said on the 3rd night, sitting across from Nixara near the main fire. "Eventually Darius will send more soldiers, more hunters, bigger armies. He won't stop until you're dead, and everyone associated with you is dead too." "I know. So what's your plan? Keep running? Keep surviving day to day?" "I don't know," Nixara admitted. "I'm still figuring out what I am, what I can do. I'm not ready to face an entire kingdom. You faced an army 3 days ago. That was different. That was one person, one fight." Nixara stared into the flames. "Going back to Shadowmere, trying to take down Darius, that's war, and I don't know how to fight a war." "Nobody does until they have to." Kess leaned forward. "But you have something Darius doesn't. You have people who believe in you, people who are willing to fight because you showed them it's possible. 37 refugees aren't an army. 37 is a start, and word is spreading. Every day, more people hear about what you did. More people question whether Darius is really as powerful as he claims. More people wonder if maybe, just maybe, things could be different." Nixara shook her head. "You're asking me to be something I'm not. A leader, a symbol. You're a woman who survived being rejected by the most powerful alpha in the territories. You're a woman who walked into an enemy camp and walked out alive. You're a woman with power that terrifies trained soldiers." Kess's voice softened slightly. "You're already a symbol, whether you want to be or not. The only question is whether you're going to use that, or let Darius control the narrative." Before Nixara could respond, a scream cut through the night. She was on her feet instantly, fire erupting from her hands, every sense sharpening. The scream came again from the far end of the camp. Nixara ran toward it, Kess right behind her, and found chaos. 3 shadow cats had somehow gotten past the perimeter, their massive forms moving like liquid darkness, their claws ripping through tents and supplies. One of them had a young man pinned, its jaws closing around his throat. Nixara didn't think. She threw fire like a spear, the flames punching through the shadow cat's side and detonating inside its body. The creature exploded into ash and smoke. The other 2 cats turned toward her, their eyes glowing yellow in the darkness. She killed the second one before it could pounce, burning it to nothing in seconds. The third was smarter. It bolted, disappearing into the rocks and shadows before Nixara could target it. The camp was in shambles. The young man the cat had pinned was dead, his throat torn out. 2 others were injured, bleeding from deep claw marks. And the food supplies, 3 days' worth of carefully rationed meat, were shredded and contaminated, useless. Nixara stood among the destruction, breathing hard, feeling the power settle back under her skin. Around her, refugees were crying, trying to help the injured, staring at their ruined supplies with expressions of despair. "This is why we can't stay here," Kes said quietly, appearing at Nixara's side. "The Frostlands will kill us. Slowly or quickly, it doesn't matter. We'll all die out here. Going back to Shadowmere means dying faster. Maybe. Or maybe it means actually fighting for something instead of just surviving." Kes looked at the dead young man, at the crying refugees, at the destroyed camp. "At least we'd die for a reason," Nixara wanted to argue, wanted to find a third option that didn't involve either freezing to death or marching into certain doom, but standing there in the ruins of the camp, watching people who'd lost everything try to salvage what little remained, she realized Kes was right. They couldn't stay here, and she couldn't abandon them. "So we're really doing this?" Ignis asked. "Leading a rebellion? Taking on an Alpha King?" "I don't know. Maybe. Probably. That's not very decisive. I'm making this up as I go. Give me a break." Nixara raised her voice, letting it carry across the camp. "Listen to me, all of you." The refugees stopped what they were doing, turning to face her. "I'm not a leader," Nixara said bluntly. "I don't know how to run a rebellion or fight a war. I'm just a woman who refused to die when someone threw me away. But Kes is right. We can't stay here. The Frostlands will kill us. And if we do nothing, Darius will kill everyone we left behind." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "So here's what I'm offering. Anyone who wants to fight, who wants to go back to Shadowmere and make Darius answer for what he's done, you can come with me. I can't promise we'll win. I can't promise you'll survive. But I can promise we'll make him regret underestimating us." Silence. Then Kes stepped forward. "I'm in." Mara followed. "Me too." The older man who'd lost his son, the woman with one arm, the young man with the twisted leg. One by one, every person in the camp stepped forward, even the children. Nixara felt something shift in her chest, something that might have been pride or terror or both. "Well," Ignis said, "guess we're doing this. Guess we are." Well, they spent the next week preparing. Nixara trained the refugees who could fight, teaching them to move together, to watch each other's backs, to exploit weaknesses. She wasn't a military tactician, but she'd spent enough time being hunted to understand how predators thought. And she had her fire. She discovered she could share it in small ways, heating weapons so they'd burn on contact, creating walls of flame to protect the vulnerable, even transferring some of her heat to people who were freezing. It drained her, left her exhausted and shaking, but it made the refugees stronger. Kes turned out to be a natural organizer, dividing people into groups based on their abilities, figuring out logistics that Nixara wouldn't have thought of. Who could scout? Who could carry supplies? Who needed to be protected? They weren't an army, but they were something. On the 8th day, a runner came from the east, a young wolf who'd been sympathetic to their cause, willing to risk his life to bring information. "Darius knows you're gathering people," he gasped, having run the entire way. "He's calling you a traitor, a terrorist. He's offering 1,000 gold pieces for your head, and pardons for anyone in your group who turns you in." "Will anyone take it?" Kes asked. The runner shook his head. "I don't think so, but he's also sending another army, bigger this time. 500 soldiers, led by Commander Thorn himself." Nixara's blood went cold. Thorn was a legend. A warrior who'd fought in the border wars, who'd supposedly killed an ice dragon single-handedly, who'd never lost a battle. "When?" she asked. "They left Shadowmere 2 days ago. They'll be here in another 3, maybe 4 if the weather slows them." "We can't fight that," Ignis said flatly. 37 refugees against 500 trained soldiers? We'd be slaughtered. "I know. We run," Kes said immediately. "Head deeper into the Frostlands. Find somewhere they can't follow." "And then what?" Mara asked. "Keep running forever? Keep hiding? Better than dying. Is it? The question came from the old woman with one arm, her voice surprisingly strong. I've been running my whole life, running from one bad situation to another. I'm tired of running. Murmurs of agreement. Nixara looked at the faces surrounding her, saw the determination mixed with fear, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. She made a decision that was probably going to get them all killed. We don't run, she said quietly, and we don't fight them head on. We do something they won't expect. Which is? Kess asked. We go to Shadowmere right now, before Thorn's army gets back. Nixara's hands ignited, flames dancing across her knuckles. We take the fight to Darius himself, cut off the head, and the army has no one to lead them. Silence. Then Kess started laughing, slightly hysterical. You want to march on the capital with 37 people, while the king's army is out looking for us. Yes, that's insane, probably. But it's also the last thing he'll expect. He thinks we're hiding, running, trying to survive. He doesn't think we're crazy enough to attack him directly. Because we're not, Ignis said. This is suicide. Maybe, but it's better than waiting to be slaughtered. How would we even get in? The young man with the twisted leg asked. The city walls are guarded. The gates are always watched. I have an idea about that, Nixara said slowly, but you're not going to like it. 2 days later, they stood on a ridge overlooking Shadowmere. The city sprawled below them, all stone walls and peaked roofs and smoking chimneys, the palace rising in the center like a black crown. Torches burned along the ramparts, and Nixara could see guards patrolling the walls even from this distance. Behind her, 37 refugees waited in the snow, armed with whatever weapons they'd been able to scavenge, their faces set with determination or resignation. They'd lost 3 people on the journey, 1 to exposure, 2 who'd simply disappeared during the night, probably deciding this was too insane to follow through with. Nixara didn't blame them. Last chance to back out, she said quietly. Once we do this, there's no going back. No one moved. Kess stepped up beside her. What's the plan? The city has a drainage system that empties into the river, old tunnels from when Shadowmere was first built. They're supposed to be sealed, but I used to explore them when I worked in the palace. There's a grate that's rusted through, big enough for people to squeeze through if they're careful. And you think it's still there? Only one way to find out. They moved down the ridge as night fell, staying low, moving in silence. Nixara's enhanced senses picked up guard patrols, and she guided her people around them, using hand signals Kess had taught her. The drainage outlet was exactly where she remembered, half hidden by winter brush and ice. The grate was still rusted, still broken, still passable. This is it, Nixara whispered. Single file. Stay quiet. Stay close. One by one, they slipped through the grate and into the darkness beyond. The tunnel was cramped, freezing, filled with standing water that had partially frozen. Nixara led the way, one hand burning with a low flame to light the path, the other trailing along the stone wall for guidance. Behind her, she could hear the refugees breathing, could feel their fear in the air like a living thing. They walked for what felt like hours through the winding tunnels, Nixara relying on half-remembered routes from her childhood explorations. Twice they had to backtrack when a passage was completely collapsed. Once they had to wade through water up to their chests, the cold so intense that even Nixara's fire couldn't keep it at bay. But finally, they emerged into a larger chamber, the old cistern beneath the palace itself. We're under the west wing, Nixara whispered. There's a maintenance shaft that leads up into the servant quarters. From there we can reach the throne room. And then what? Mara asked, her teeth chattering. Then I kill Darius Kane. Just like that? Ignis sounded skeptical. You're going to walk into the throne room and kill the Alpha King? That's the plan. It's a terrible plan. You have a better one? Ignis fell silent. They climbed the maintenance shaft, emerging into a storage room Nixara remembered from her time as a servant. From there, they moved through the servant passages, avoiding the main halls where guards would be stationed. The palace felt different, darker. There were fewer servants than Nixara remembered, and the ones they passed looked thin, frightened, keeping their heads down. The purges had reached even here. They were halfway to the throne room when alarms began to sound. Someone had found them. Run, Kess shouted. They ran. the refugees scattering through the corridors, guards appearing from every direction. Nixara threw fire to cover their retreat, burning through soldiers who tried to block their path. Chaos erupted through the palace. Nixara lost track of her people, lost track of everything except the need to keep moving forward, to reach the throne room, to finish what she'd started. She burst through the massive doors into the hall where she'd been rejected, the same hall where she'd knelt and begged and been branded like an animal. And there, sitting on his obsidian throne, was Darius Kane. He didn't look surprised. He looked like he'd been waiting. "Nixara," he said calmly, his silver eyes meeting hers across the hall. "I wondered when you'd come." She stepped forward, her entire body igniting with blue-white flame, her eyes blazing gold. "You killed innocent people," she said, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "Children, elders, anyone you decided was weak or defective or not loyal enough. You turned this kingdom into a slaughterhouse." "I did what was necessary," Darius replied, standing. "What you forced me to do. You challenged my authority, made me look weak. I had to prove I was still in control." "By murdering people who couldn't fight back? By eliminating the weakness you revealed." He descended from the throne, and Nixara saw he was wearing full battle armor, a sword at his hip. "You were right, you know. That night when the bond snapped, I felt it. Felt what you were hiding, what was buried inside you. That's why I rejected you, not because you were weak." Nixara's flames flickered. "What?" "Because you were too powerful. Because the Council's seers had warned me that the Valifier bloodline still existed, that if it ever awakened, it would destroy everything we'd built. The wolf packs, the alpha hierarchy, the entire structure of our society." He drew his sword, the blade gleaming silver. "So I rejected you, hoping the bond's breaking would kill you. When it didn't, I tried to have you hunted down. And when that failed, I created a situation so terrible that you'd have to come back." Understanding crashed over Nixara like ice water. "The purges, the executions. You did all of that to draw me out." "Of course. I knew you wouldn't be able to stay away once you realized people were suffering because of you. I knew your weakness, not physical weakness, but the kind that makes you care about people who mean nothing." He smiled, cold and sharp. "And now you're here, exactly where I wanted you, in my city, in my palace, surrounded by my guards." As if on cue, the doors behind Nixara slammed open. She spun to see hundreds of soldiers pouring into the hall, all armed, all moving to surround her. And at their head, looking battered but alive, was Seraphine Ashcroft. "Hello, Nixara," Seraphine said, her voice raspy from the damage Nixara had inflicted. Her face was covered in burn scars, her hair cut short where it had been singed away. "Did you really think we wouldn't be prepared? That Darius would just sit on his throne and wait for you to kill him?" Nixara's heart hammered against her ribs. "We walked into a trap." "Of course we did," Ignis said grimly. "The question is whether we can fight our way out." She looked at the soldiers surrounding her, at Darius standing calm and confident, at Seraphine's scarred smile. Then she looked at the refugees being dragged into the hall by more guards, all of them captured, all of them beaten and bloodied. Kes, Mara, the old woman, the children, all of them. "Let them go," Nixara said, her voice low and dangerous. "This is between us. They have nothing to do with—" "They have everything to do with it," Darius interrupted. "They're proof that defying me has consequences. They're examples of what happens when you follow a false prophet promising salvation." He gestured to his guards. "Execute them, all of them. Make it slow." "No!" Nixara exploded. Not a metaphor. Her entire body detonated with fire so intense, so impossibly hot, that the stone floor beneath her feet melted. The flames roared outward in a wave that crashed into the surrounding soldiers, incinerating dozens in seconds. But there were too many. For every one she killed, two more appeared. They had silver nets, weapons designed to contain fire wielders, tactics developed specifically to counter her. They brought her down. The nets wrapped around her, burning her skin, dampening her fire. She screamed, thrashing, but the silver was poisoned to the magic in her blood, weakening her, making every movement agony. She hit the ground hard, still fighting, still burning, but contained. Darius walked over to her, looking down with an expression that might have been pity if it wasn't so cold. "You could have been queen," he said quietly. If you'd just stayed weak, stayed small, none of this would have happened. Nixara spit blood at his feet. Go to hell. After you. He raised his hand, and Nixara saw guards dragging Kess forward, forcing her to her knees. Watch, Darius commanded. Watch what happens because of your choices. A guard raised his sword toward Kess's neck, and Nixara felt something inside her break. Not the bond this time, but something deeper, older, more fundamental. The part of her that had been trying to stay human. The part that had been holding back. She stopped fighting the silver nets and instead pulled them into herself. Let the poison spread through her veins, let it mix with the Valifier fire burning in her blood. What are you doing? Ignis screamed. That will kill you! I know, but I'm taking them with me. The fire changed. Not blue-white anymore. Black. Flames the color of void, the color of nothing, erupting from Nixara's body, with a force that shattered the silver nets like they were made of paper. The throne room filled with fire that didn't just burn. It unmade things, turning stone to dust, metal to vapor, flesh to absolute nothing. Darius's eyes went wide with shock and terror as the black flames raced toward him. And Nixara, burning from the inside out, dying and being reborn in the same moment, smiled. You should have killed me when you had the chance. The black flames consumed everything. Nixara felt them tearing through her body, rewriting her at a cellular level, burning away what was left of the scared servant girl and leaving something else in her place. The pain was infinite, worse than the rejection, worse than the branding, worse than anything she'd ever experienced, but she held on to it, channeled it, turned it into weapon. The fire roared outward in waves that reduced stone pillars to dust, melted the obsidian throne into slag, turned the ancient tapestries on the walls into nothing but memory. Soldiers screamed as the flames touched them, their bodies disintegrating before they could even finish the sound. Darius shifted into his wolf form mid-leap, trying to escape the radius of destruction, his massive black body airborne and desperate. The flames caught him anyway. He crashed to the ground, half his fur already burning away, revealing skin beneath that was charring and cracking. He howled, the sound breaking something in Nixara's chest, despite everything he'd done, despite everything he'd taken from her, because the bond was still there, broken, twisted, poisoned, but still there, screaming as she killed her fated mate. Don't stop, Ignis commanded, her voice urgent. If you stop now, you die. The black fire doesn't forgive hesitation. Nixara pushed harder, feeling the flames intensify, feeling them consuming her from the inside as they consumed everything else. She was dying. She knew that with absolute certainty. The black fire wasn't something you controlled. It was something you unleashed and hoped you could survive long enough to accomplish whatever you needed before it ate you alive. But then, hands grabbed her shoulders from behind. Cool hands, not burning, somehow able to touch her despite the inferno radiating from her skin. Stop, a voice said in her ear. Female, calm, absolutely commanding. Stop, or you'll take the whole city with you. Nixara tried to turn, tried to see who was speaking, but the black flames were eating her vision, turning everything into darkness and heat. I said stop. Power crashed into her, not fire, something else, something cold and ancient and impossibly strong. It wrapped around the black flames like ice around a wildfire, containing them, compressing them, forcing them back into Nixara's body, even as they fought to keep burning. The pain doubled, tripled, became something that transcended physical sensation and turned into pure existential agony. Nixara screamed, the sound tearing from her throat with enough force to crack what was left of the throne room's ceiling. And then, silence. The black flames guttered out, leaving behind a throne room that looked like it had been hit by a meteor. The floor was cracked and melted, the walls scorched black, bodies reduced to ash piles scattered across scorched stone. The smell of burned flesh and molten metal filled the air. Nixara collapsed, every muscle in her body giving out simultaneously. She would have hit the ground if the hands on her shoulders hadn't held her up. Easy, the voice said, gentler now. You're not done yet. Don't pass out on me. Nixara forced her eyes open, forced herself to focus through the haze of pain and exhaustion. The woman holding her was tall, maybe 60 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that were the same molten gold as Nixara's. She wore simple robes that somehow hadn't burned despite the inferno, and her expression was a mixture of exasperation and something that might have been pride. Who? Nixara's voice came out as a rasp. Later. Right now we need to deal with the immediate problem. The woman nodded toward the center of the ruined throne room. Darius was still alive. Barely. His wolf form had shifted back to human, but his body was a horror show of third-degree burns, charred flesh, exposed muscle. He was gasping, each breath a wet rattle, his silver eyes fixed on Nixara with an expression that was equal parts hatred and shock. Around them, the few soldiers who'd survived were backing away, their weapons lowered, their faces pale. Seraphine was gone. Either dead or fled, Nixara couldn't tell. But Kes was there, still on her knees where the guard had forced her, her eyes wide as she stared at Nixara. And the other refugees, the ones who'd been captured, were crawling out from behind fallen pillars and scorched rubble, looking stunned but alive. "You saved them," Nixara whispered, looking at the silver-haired woman. "When I lost control, you contained the fire enough to save them. I contained it enough to save the city," the woman corrected. "Your friend surviving was a fortunate side effect. Now finish what you started before he heals." Nixara looked at Darius, at the man who'd rejected her, who'd branded her, who'd orchestrated the deaths of hundreds just to draw her out. The bond between them pulsed weakly, dying, but not quite dead. She could kill him. Should kill him. He deserved it after everything he'd done. But looking at him now, broken and burned and gasping for air, she felt something unexpected. Not pity, not forgiveness, but the realization that killing him wouldn't change anything, wouldn't bring back the people he'd murdered, wouldn't undo the rejection or erase the brand on her neck or heal the damage he'd caused. It would just make her a killer, and she'd killed enough today. "No," she said quietly. The silver-haired woman raised an eyebrow. "No? I'm not killing him." Nixara pulled away from the woman's grip, standing on her own despite the way her legs shook. "He's done. Broken. Let him live with what he's become." She turned to the watching soldiers, to the refugees, to Kes, who was pushing herself to her feet. "Darius Khan is no longer fit to rule," Nixara said, her voice carrying across the ruined throne room with surprising strength. "He orchestrated the murder of innocents. He used his power not to protect this kingdom, but to terrorize it. He doesn't deserve the crown." "And you do?" one of the surviving soldiers called out, his voice shaking but defiant. "You, who just burned half the palace? Who killed dozens of us? What makes you any better?" It was a fair question. Nixara didn't have a good answer. "I don't want the crown," she said finally. "I never did. I just wanted to be left alone. But he wouldn't allow that. So now we're here, in the ashes of his kingdom, and someone has to decide what happens next." "Let them decide," the silver-haired woman said, gesturing to the assembled wolves, soldiers, refugees, servants who'd emerged from hiding, nobles who'd survived the black flames. "You conquered this throne room. The old laws say that gives you the right to claim it, but you don't have to. You can walk away. Let them sort out their own mess." Nixara looked at the faces surrounding her. Saw fear, yes, but also hope. Desperation. The same expression the refugees had worn when they'd come looking for her in the Frostlands. If she walked away now, the power vacuum would tear the kingdom apart. The surviving nobles would fight for control. More people would die. The purges might even continue under new leadership, but if she stayed, "You'd be responsible for them," Ignis said quietly. "For all of them. For their safety, their futures, their lives. That's what ruling means." "I don't know how to rule." "Nobody does until they try." Nixara took a deep breath, feeling the power in her chest, still there, still burning, but no longer trying to consume her. The black flames had retreated, leaving behind something that felt more stable, more controlled. "I'll stay," she said. "Not as queen, not yet, but as temporary protection, until we can figure out a better system, one that doesn't involve murdering people for being imperfect." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some approving, some skeptical, all uncertain. Kes pushed through the crowd, limping slightly, her face bruised but her eyes bright. "You're really doing this? Taking responsibility for this mess?" "Apparently." "You're insane." "Probably." Nixara managed a small smile. "But you're the one who told me I was already a symbol whether I wanted to be or not. So I might as well try to be a useful one." The silver-haired woman laughed, the sound sharp and unexpected. Well said. I think you might actually survive this after all. Who are you? Nixara asked, turning to face her properly. The woman's smile was enigmatic. I'm Cassia Valafier, your grandmother, and we have a lot to discuss. The next 3 days were chaos. Darius was locked in the palace dungeons. His injuries tended just enough to keep him alive, but in no condition to cause trouble. Seraphine had fled during the battle, disappearing into the night, but reports placed her in the Eastern Territories, rallying support among nobles who were loyal to the old regime. Commander Thorne's army returned to find the palace in ruins and their king imprisoned. After tense negotiations and a demonstration of Nixara's power that left several training dummies as ash piles, Thorne had reluctantly agreed to a temporary ceasefire while the situation stabilized, which was a diplomatic way of saying everyone was too shocked and confused to know what to do next. Nixara spent most of those 3 days in meetings she didn't understand, making decisions she wasn't qualified to make, and trying not to set anything on fire out of frustration. The Council of Elders, the ones who'd survived the throne room battle, alternated between treating her like a dangerous weapon they needed to contain and a valuable asset they needed to control. The surviving nobles were worse, their thinly veiled contempt mixing with fear in ways that made every interaction exhausting. But the common people, the servants and workers and refugees who'd been targeted by the purges, they looked at her like salvation. It was terrifying. You can't please everyone, Cassia said on the third evening, finding Nixara on one of the palace balconies, staring out at the city below. Stop trying. Nixara didn't look at her. I have no idea what I'm doing. Obviously, but you're doing it anyway, which is more than most people manage. Cassia leaned against the railing beside her. Do you know why the Valafier bloodline was hunted to near extinction? Because we're dangerous? Because we refused to submit to the pack hierarchy. Your ancestors were fire wielders in a world that worshipped wolves and alphas. They couldn't be controlled through dominance displays or pack bonds. They answered to no one but themselves. Cassia's expression turned distant. The Wolf Kingdom saw that as a threat, so they systematically eliminated the bloodline over centuries, killed the men, forcibly bonded the women to alphas to dilute the magic. By the time I was born, there were maybe a dozen of us left. What happened to them? Dead. All of them. I'm the last of my generation. You're the last of yours. Cassia looked at her with those golden eyes that were like looking in a mirror. Your mother tried to hide what she was, tried to be normal, to blend in, to pretend the fire didn't exist. It killed her anyway. The magic demands to be used, to be acknowledged. Suppressing it is like holding your breath. Eventually your body forces you to inhale, and if you're underwater when that happens, Nixara's throat tightened. She died giving birth to me. She died because the magic erupted during labor, and she didn't know how to control it. It consumed her from the inside. Cassia's voice was gentle. It wasn't your fault. It was the fault of a world that made her ashamed of her power. Where were you? Why didn't you help her? I tried. She ran from me. Thought I was going to force her to embrace the Valafier legacy, to fight the wolves, to be something she didn't want to be. Cassia's jaw tightened. I should have tried harder. Should have found her before she ended up in Shadowmere. Should have protected her. But you're here now. I felt the awakening. When Darius rejected you and the dormant magic ignited, it sent out a pulse that every living Valafier would have felt. Since I'm the only other one, she shrugged, I came as fast as I could. Took me 3 weeks to track you down. By then, you'd already started your war. Nixara turned to face her fully. Can you teach me? To control this properly? To not burn everything around me when I lose control? That's why I'm here. Cassia smiled, and it was the first genuinely warm expression Nixara had seen from her. You have raw power, more than I've ever seen. But power without control is just destruction. I can teach you discipline, technique, how to use the fire without letting it use you. The black flames should have killed you, would have killed anyone else. The fact that you survived means you have more potential than I thought possible. Cassia's expression turned serious. But you can't use them again. Not until you've mastered every other aspect of your power. The black fire isn't a weapon, it's annihilation. And if you call it forth again before you're ready, it won't stop consuming until there's nothing left. Nixara thought about the feeling of burning from the inside out, of the flames eating her alive even as they destroyed everything around her. Understood. A knock on the balcony door interrupted them. Kes stepped out, looking harried. Sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation. What kind of situation? The kind where 50 wolves from the borderlands just arrived at the gates, asking for sanctuary. They heard what happened here, heard about the purge's ending, and decided to risk the journey. Kes ran a hand through her short hair. Problem is, we don't have food for 50 more people. The palace stores are running low, and with winter getting worse, open the gates, Nixara said immediately. Let them in. We'll figure out the food situation. With what? We're already rationing for the refugees we have. Then I'll hunt. Nixara flexed her hands, feeling the power respond. I kept the Frostlands refugees fed. I can do it for these people too. Kes looked skeptical. You're going to personally hunt enough game to feed hundreds of people? If I have to, or I'll find another solution. Nixara turned back to the city view. We don't turn away people who need help. That's what Darius did. That's what made him a monster. It's also going to drain your resources and make you vulnerable, Cassia observed. The other kingdoms are watching, waiting to see if you're strong enough to hold Shadowmere or weak enough to be conquered. Every person you take in is another mouth to feed, another body to protect. I don't care. You should. Compassion is admirable, but it won't stop an invading army. Nixara met her grandmother's gaze. Then I'll have to be strong enough to protect them, and compassionate enough to accept them. Because if I have to choose between being a strong ruler who abandons people in need, or a weak one who at least tries to help, I choose weakness. Cassia stared at her for a long moment, then laughed. You really are your mother's daughter, stubborn to the point of self-destruction. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. But fine, we do it your way. Just know that when this inevitably creates problems, I'm going to say I told you so. Over the next week, more refugees arrived. Not just from the borderlands, but from all over the northern territories. Word had spread that the purges were over, that the rejected queen, the name had stuck despite Nixara's protests, had defeated Darius Kane and was offering sanctuary to anyone who needed it. They came in groups of 10, 20, sometimes 50. The old, the young, the injured, the sick. People who'd been marked for death under the old regime, who'd been hiding or running or just trying to survive. Nixara accepted them all. The palace filled beyond capacity. They set up tents in the courtyards, converted storage rooms into dormitories, repurposed the grand ballroom into a massive sleeping area. It was chaotic and cramped and absolutely unsustainable. But it was also the right thing to do. You're building loyalty, Cassia observed one evening as they watched refugees sharing a communal meal in what used to be the formal dining hall. Every person you save becomes someone who'll support you when the real challenges come. I'm not doing it for loyalty. I know, that's what makes it effective. Cassia nodded toward a group of children playing in the corner, their laughter echoing off the stone walls. Those kids will grow up remembering that you saved them when no one else would. That's worth more than any army. Nixara watched the children, felt something warm in her chest that had nothing to do with fire. Maybe she didn't know how to rule. Maybe she was making mistakes left and right. Maybe this whole thing was going to collapse spectacularly. But for the first time since the rejection, she felt like she was doing something that mattered. The first real challenge came on the 10th day. Nixara was in the training yard with Cassia, practicing control exercises, creating shapes with flame, maintaining multiple fires simultaneously, channeling heat without visible fire, when Thorn appeared at the edge of the yard. We need to talk, he said without preamble. Nixara let the flames die, nodding to Cassia, who stepped back to give them space. Thorn was a massive man, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders like a mountain and scars covering every visible inch of skin. He'd been Darius's top military commander for 20 years, had led the armies that conquered the Shadow Peak Mountains and secured the northern borders. And he was looking at Nixara with an expression she couldn't quite read. There's an army marching on Shadowmere, he said bluntly, 3,000 strong, led by Lord Vakar from the Eastern Territories. He's claiming that the throne is in chaos, that you're an illegitimate usurper, and that he's coming to restore order. Nixara's stomach dropped. 3,000? Give or take, they'll be here in 4 days, maybe 5. Thorn crossed his arms. I have 500 soldiers under my command. Good soldiers, but they're exhausted from the march to the Frostlands and the confusion of the past week. And you have, what, a few dozen refugees who can fight? We have me, Nixara said, hearing the uncertainty in her own voice.
You. Right. Thorn's expression didn't change. I watched you burn half the throne room with black flames that should have killed you. I know you're powerful, but can you fight 3,000 soldiers? Can you do that without destroying the city you're trying to protect? Nixara didn't answer because she didn't have an answer. That's what I thought. Thorn sighed, the sound surprisingly weary for such a large man. So here's your choice. You can run. Take your refugees and flee into the Frostlands. Let Vakar take the city. Or you can fight, probably die, and take a lot of good people with you. Or what? Or you accept help. Thorn met her gaze steadily. I didn't like what Darius became. Didn't like the purges or the executions or the fear he used to control people. I served him because I thought he was strong, thought he could protect the kingdom. But watching him orchestrate the murder of children to draw out one woman? That's not strength. That's weakness disguised as power. He took a step closer. You're not a trained ruler. You don't know military strategy or political maneuvering, but you walked into an army camp and challenged their commander. You survived being rejected by your fated mate. You turned the black flames on yourself and lived. That's a different kind of strength, one I can respect. Nixara stared at him. What are you saying? I'm saying I'll support you. My soldiers will support you. Not because we think you're perfect or because we believe you'll never make mistakes, but because you're trying to build something better than what we had. Thorn held out his hand. So what do you say? Want an army? Nixara looked at his outstretched hand, scarred and calloused and absolutely genuine. This was it. The moment where she stopped being a girl who'd survived rejection and started being something else. A leader? A symbol. Someone people would follow into battle. She took his hand. Yes, she said firmly. Yes, I want an army, and I want your advice on how to not get everyone killed when Vakar arrives. Thorn's grip was strong, his smile small but real. Then let's get to work. We have 4 days to turn a bunch of refugees and exhausted soldiers into something resembling a fighting force. It's not enough time, but it'll have to be. They spent the next 4 days in intense preparation. Thorn drilled the able-bodied refugees in basic combat, nothing fancy, just enough to make them dangerous in close quarters. He organized the palace defenses, identifying weak points in the walls, setting up supply caches, creating fallback positions. Cassia worked with Nixara on controlled applications of power, how to create walls of fire that would burn attackers but not spread to buildings, how to superheat weapons without melting them, how to use fire as intimidation rather than just destruction. Kess coordinated the civilians, making sure the children and elderly had safe places to shelter, that medical supplies were ready, that everyone knew what to do when the fighting started. And Nixara discovered something unexpected. She was good at this. Not the fighting, that was still mostly instinct and raw power, but the organizing, the planning, the listening to advice from people who knew more than she did and synthesizing it into decisions. She wasn't trying to be Darius, wasn't trying to rule through fear and dominance. She was just trying to keep people alive. And somehow, that was working. On the morning of the 4th day, Vakar's army appeared on the horizon. 3,000 wolves in battle formation, their banners flying, their armor gleaming. They looked professional, organized, absolutely lethal. Nixara stood on the palace walls, flanked by Thorn and Cassia, looking at the approaching force with a mixture of fear and determination. Last chance to run, Thorn said quietly. Not running. Good. Because I've got a plan, but it's going to require you to do something incredibly stupid. Nixara glanced at him. How stupid? Walk out there alone and challenge Vakar to single combat. Cassia turned to stare at him. That's not stupid. That's suicidal. Vakar is a veteran warrior who's been fighting for 40 years. She's been training for less than 2 weeks. I know. But he's also arrogant, old school. He believes in pack hierarchy and alpha dominance. If she challenges him and he refuses, he looks weak in front of his army. If he accepts and fights her, we might avoid a full battle. Thorn looked at Nixara. It's a risk, but it's better than letting 3,000 soldiers crash into our walls. Nixara thought about it, felt the power in her chest responding to the possibility of a fight. I'll do it, she said.
Cassia grabbed her arm. You don't have to prove anything to these people. I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm trying to save lives. Nixara pulled gently free. If there's a chance we can avoid a full battle, I have to take it. She walked down from the walls, through the palace, out the main gates, alone. The gates closed behind her with a sound like finality. Nixara walked across the open ground between the city and Vakar's army, her footsteps crunching in the snow, her heart hammering but her expression calm. The army watched her approach, 3,000 pairs of eyes tracking her movement. A figure detached from the front ranks, a massive wolf in human form, easily 7 feet tall, with iron-gray hair and eyes like chips of stone. He wore full battle armor and carried a sword that looked like it weighed more than Nixara did. Lord Vakar. He stopped 20 feet from her, looking her up and down with undisguised contempt. You're the usurper, he said, his voice like grinding rocks. The Omega who thinks she can rule. I'm Nixara Vale, she replied evenly, and I'm not trying to rule. I'm trying to prevent this kingdom from tearing itself apart. By imprisoning the rightful king? By burning half the palace? By sheltering criminals and traitors? By stopping the purges? By saving people who were being murdered for being imperfect? By offering something better than fear and death? Vakar's lip curled. Weakness. Darius was right to reject you. You're too soft to rule, too compassionate to survive. Maybe. But I'm also the one standing here while Darius is locked in a dungeon, broken and burned. So maybe compassion isn't the weakness you think it is. She let flames dance across her hands, blue-white and bright. I challenge you to single combat, Nixara said, her voice carrying across the field. If I win, your army withdraws and recognizes my authority. If you win, you can do whatever you want with the city. Vakar stared at her, then threw back his head and laughed. You? Fight me? Girl, I was killing enemies before you were born. I fought in wars that would break your mind. And you think you can challenge me? I think you're afraid to refuse in front of your army. The laughter stopped. Vakar's eyes went cold. Fine, I accept. And when I'm done with you, I'm going to mount your head on the palace gates as a reminder of what happens to upstarts, who forget their place. He drew his sword. Nixara ignited. They fought in the snow between the city and the army, 2 figures surrounded by 3,000 witnesses. Vakar was everything Cassia had warned, fast, skilled, brutal. His sword moved like quicksilver, cutting through the air where Nixara had been a heartbeat before. He fought with the precision of decades of experience, each strike calculated to exploit weakness, each movement economical and deadly. But Nixara had something he didn't. Fire that answered to her will. She didn't try to match his swordsmanship. She wasn't trained enough for that. Instead, she used her flames as both weapon and defense, creating walls of fire to deflect strikes, superheating the ground beneath his feet to throw off his balance, throwing spears of condensed flame that forced him to dodge. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't what a trained warrior would do. But it worked. Vakar's sword strikes became more desperate as Nixara's flames drove him back. As the snow around them melted into a circle of scorched earth, his armor began to glow red-hot, burning him through the metal. Impossible, he gasped, sweat streaming down his face. You're just an Omega, just a... Nixara caught his sword in her bare hand, the metal hissing as it touched her burning skin. I'm not an Omega, she said quietly. I'm not a Beta or an Alpha. I'm Valifier, and you're going to remember that. She ripped the sword from his grip, turned it to molten slag, let it drip through her fingers. Vakar collapsed to his knees, his armor smoking, his face pale with shock and exhaustion. Yield, Nixara said. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then he bowed his head. I yield. Nixara turned to face the assembled army, her entire body still burning with flames, her voice carrying across the field. Your commander has yielded. The challenge is over. Any of you who want to continue this fight, step forward now. No one moved. 3,000 soldiers just stood there, staring at the woman who'd defeated their leader in single combat. "Good," Nixara said. "Then here's what happens next. You can leave. Go home. Tell everyone that Shadowmere is under new management, that the purges are over, that anyone who needs sanctuary can find it here. Or," she paused, let the flames dim slightly, "or you can stay. Help us rebuild. Help us create something better than what Darius built. I can't pay you much. Can't promise comfort or glory, but I can promise we'll try to do better, to be better." Silence. Then one soldier stepped forward. Then another. Then 10. 20. 100. By the time the sun set, 2/3 of Vakar's army had laid down their weapons and asked to stay. And Nixara, standing in the scorched earth between the city and the army, felt something shift, not just in the world around her, but in herself. She wasn't the rejected queen anymore. She was becoming something else entirely. The coronation wasn't supposed to happen. Nixara had fought against it for 3 months, insisting she didn't want a crown, didn't need the title, would be perfectly happy just helping organize the rebuilding efforts and training with Cassia. But the people had other ideas. It started small. Refugees calling her Your Majesty, even when she corrected them, soldiers saluting when she passed, children drawing pictures of her with a crown made of flames. Then the Council of Elders, rebuilt with new members who'd actually experienced the purges instead of ordering them, formally petitioned her to accept the throne. The kingdom needs stability, the head counselor had argued. An elderly woman named Mira, who'd lost 3 grandchildren to Darius's executioners. "We need someone the people believe in, someone who's proven they'll fight for us." "I'm not qualified," Nixara had protested. "I was a servant. I don't know anything about ruling." "Darius knew everything about ruling," Mira had replied quietly, "and he used that knowledge to turn us into a nightmare. Maybe what we need isn't someone who knows how to rule. Maybe we need someone who knows how to care." So now, on the first day of spring, 3 months after she'd walked into Vakar's army alone, Nixara stood in the reconstructed throne room wearing ceremonial robes that felt too heavy and too formal and absolutely wrong. The room was packed. Refugees who'd found sanctuary in Shadowmere, soldiers who'd laid down their weapons and chosen to stay, nobles who'd survived the chaos and decided supporting her was smarter than fighting, common folk from every corner of the Northern Territories who'd traveled to witness this moment. Kes stood near the front, wearing formal clothes that she looked deeply uncomfortable in, grinning like this was the best joke she'd ever heard. Thorn was there in full military regalia, his scarred face impassive, but his eyes showing something that might have been approval. Cassia stood to the side, her silver hair braided with threads of gold, her expression unreadable. And in the back, in chains and under heavy guard, was Darius. Nixara had insisted on that, insisted he watch this. Not out of cruelty, though part of her that she wasn't proud of wanted him to see what she'd become, but because he needed to understand that his way of ruling was over. The high priestess, a woman who served the old gods and somehow managed to remain neutral through all the political chaos, stepped forward with the crown, not the obsidian monstrosity Darius had worn. That had been melted in the black flames and was gone forever. This crown was different, simpler, wrought from silver and iron with small rubies set in patterns that resembled flames. It had been commissioned specifically for this moment, designed to represent both strength and sacrifice. "Nixara Vale," the high priestess said, her voice carrying across the silent hall. "You stand before this assembly having proven yourself through trial and fire. You have defended the defenseless, challenged the unjust, and rebuilt what was broken. Do you accept the responsibility of leadership? Do you swear to protect this kingdom and its people, to rule with wisdom and compassion, to put their welfare above your own desires?" Nixara's throat was dry. "I do." "Do you understand that a crown is not a reward, but a burden? That from this day forward, your life belongs not to yourself, but to those you serve?" Did she understand that? Really understand it? She looked out at the assembled faces, saw Mara, the deaf refugee who'd been marked for execution, now working in the palace archives. Saw the old woman with one arm who'd survived the Frostlands, now teaching children to read. Saw the young man with the twisted leg running a kitchen that fed hundreds. Saw all the people who'd been thrown away, discarded, deemed worthless by the old regime,
All of them here now, all of them alive, all of them looking at her like she'd given them something more precious than sanctuary. Hope. I understand, Nixara said, and meant it. The high priestess placed the crown on her head. The weight was immediate and surprising, not just the physical weight of metal and gems, but something else. Something that pressed down on her shoulders and settled into her bones. Responsibility. The hall erupted in applause and cheers that shook the rebuilt walls. Nixara stood there, wearing a crown she'd never wanted, ruling a kingdom she'd never asked for, and felt something unexpected. Not happiness exactly, but rightness. Like maybe this was where she was supposed to be all along. The celebration lasted 3 days. There were feasts and performances and speeches that made Nixara want to crawl under the nearest table. She smiled until her face hurt, shook hands until her fingers were numb, and listened to more congratulations than any person should have to endure. But on the 4th morning, reality returned with a vengeance. Nixara sat in the council chamber, the same room where Darius had once made decisions about who lived and died, surrounded by advisors and military commanders, and people who wanted her to make impossible choices. The Eastern Territories are still unstable, Thorn was saying, pointing to a map spread across the table. Seraphine's been rallying support, claiming you're a false queen who seized power through dark magic. She's got maybe 500 loyalists, not enough for a full assault, but enough to cause problems. What kind of problems? Nixara asked. Raids on supply caravans, attacks on outlying villages. She's trying to make you look weak, like you can't protect your own people. Can we negotiate with her? Thorn looked skeptical. The woman you burned and humiliated? The one whose face is permanently scarred because of you? I'm thinking negotiation isn't her preferred option. Then what do you suggest? Send a force to hunt her down. End the threat permanently. Nixara felt the familiar weight of decision-making settle over her. 3 months ago, she would have said yes without hesitation. Hunt down the enemy. Eliminate the threat. Protect her people. But 3 months of ruling had taught her that every decision had consequences. Every action created ripples. No, she said finally. We don't hunt her. We make it clear she's welcome to return if she lays down her weapons. We offer amnesty to any of her followers who want to come back. And we strengthen the defenses of the villages she's targeting so they can protect themselves. That's soft, one of the nobles muttered. That's showing weakness. Nixara turned to face him, let a flicker of flame dance across her knuckles. Is it? Or is it showing that we're strong enough to offer mercy instead of just responding with violence? The noble went quiet. We do it her way, Thorn said, and there was something in his voice that sounded like approval. Strengthen the villages, offer amnesty, make it clear that violence isn't the only option. But we also keep scouts watching Seraphine's movements. If she escalates, we respond accordingly. The meeting continued for hours, covering everything from food distribution to trade negotiations to the question of what to do with Darius. That last one kept coming up. He can't stay in the dungeons forever, Mira pointed out. Either execute him or exile him. Keeping him locked up just creates a symbol for anyone who wants to challenge your rule. I'm not executing him, Nixara said firmly. An exile means he could return with an army. So what's the third option? There isn't one, another counselor said. This is the problem with mercy. Eventually, you have to make the hard choices. Nixara stood, the meeting clearly over. Then I'll make one. But not today. She left the council chamber and went looking for Cassia, finding her grandmother in the training yard working through combat forms that looked like a dance choreographed by fire itself. You're avoiding the Darius problem, Cassia said without stopping her practice. I'm thinking about it. Thinking for 3 months is just avoidance with extra steps. Cassia finished her form, let the flames die. You know what you have to do, you're just afraid to do it. I'm not afraid. You are. Because killing him feels too much like becoming what he was. And letting him live feels weak. Cassia walked over to her. So you're stuck, paralyzed by the fear of making the wrong choice. Nixara sank onto a bench, feeling exhausted. What would you do? Me? I'd have killed him 3 months ago and been done with it. But I'm not you. Cassia sat beside her. You want to build something better than what came before. That means sometimes making choices that feel uncomfortable, that don't fit into neat categories of strength or weakness. That's not helpful.
It's not supposed to be helpful. It's supposed to make you think. Cassia was quiet for a moment. Your mother struggled with this too. The weight of power, the fear of becoming the monster while fighting monsters. It's why she ran, tried to hide what she was. And it killed her. Maybe. Or maybe she just wasn't ready for what the power demanded. Cassia looked at her with those golden eyes that were like looking in a mirror. But you're not her. You walked into fire and came out stronger. You took a broken kingdom and started rebuilding it. You're ready for this, even if you don't feel like it. Nyxara stood, decision crystallizing. I need to talk to him. The dungeons beneath the palace were cold and dark, lit only by torches that cast dancing shadows on stone walls. Darius's cell was at the end of the corridor, guarded by two soldiers who nodded respectfully as Nyxara approached. He was sitting against the far wall when she entered, his body still showing the scars from the black flames, his silver eyes tracking her movement with an intensity that made her skin prickle. The bond between them pulsed faintly, never truly broken, just damaged beyond repair, a constant reminder of what might have been. Come to gloat? Darius asked, his voice rough from disuse. Come to talk. Nyxara pulled up a stool, sat down facing him through the bars. The council wants me to execute you or exile you. I've been putting it off for 3 months because I don't know what to do. How unlike a queen, showing weakness to your prisoner. Maybe. Or maybe I'm showing you something you never understood. Nyxara leaned forward. I didn't want this. Any of this. I wanted to be your mate. Wanted to believe in the bond. Wanted a future that wasn't about power or thrones or burning kingdoms. You took that from me. I saved you from it, Darius countered. The bond would have destroyed you. The Valifier power would have consumed you. I was trying to protect. Don't. Nyxara's voice was sharp. Don't pretend you rejected me for my own good. You rejected me because you were afraid. Afraid I'd be stronger than you. Afraid I'd challenge your power. Afraid the seers were right and I'd destroy everything you'd built. Darius's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. And you were right, Nyxara continued. I did destroy what you built, but only because what you built was rotten. You ruled through fear and violence, killed anyone you deemed weak, turned this kingdom into a nightmare. And when I survived your rejection, instead of reconsidering your choices, you doubled down, killed hundreds just to draw me out. I was protecting the kingdom's strength. You were protecting your ego. Nyxara stood, pacing the small cell. Real strength isn't about eliminating weakness. It's about protecting it. Real power isn't making everyone afraid of you. It's making them believe you'll fight for them. Pretty words. But when the next threat comes, when the neighboring kingdoms decide you're vulnerable, when internal enemies rise up, your compassion won't save you. Maybe not. But at least I'll face those threats knowing I didn't become the monster while fighting them. Nyxara stopped pacing, faced him directly. I'm not going to execute you, and I'm not going to exile you. I'm going to give you a choice. Darius's eyes narrowed. What choice? You can stay here, in this cell, for the rest of your life. Comfortable enough, fed and cared for, but imprisoned. Or, she paused. Or you can swear an oath to serve the kingdom, not as king, but as an advisor. Someone who knows the old ways, who can help us avoid the mistakes of the past while building something new. Silence. Then Darius laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. You want me to advise you? To help the woman who destroyed everything I built? I want you to have a choice, Nyxara said quietly. The same choice you never gave me. The same choice you never gave the people you killed. A chance to be something other than what you were. And if I refuse? Then you stay here. Not as punishment, but as protection. For you and for everyone else. Nyxara moved toward the door. Think about it. I'll come back in a week for your answer. She was halfway to the door when Darius spoke again. Why? Nyxara turned. Why what? Why offer this? Why not just kill me and be done with it? I rejected you, branded you, tried to have you murdered. By all rights, you should want me dead. I did want you dead for a long time. Nyxara felt the bond pulse between them, broken but still there. But I've learned something these past months. Revenge might feel good in the moment, but it doesn't fix anything. Doesn't heal the damage, doesn't prevent it from happening again. If I execute you, I'm just proving that strength means eliminating your enemies, and I'm trying to build something different. Different doesn't mean better.
Maybe not, but it's worth trying. Nixara opened the door, paused. You made me who I am, Darius. Not because you rejected me, but because you forced me to become strong enough to survive it. So in a twisted way, I owe you. This is me paying that debt. What you do with the opportunity is up to you. She left him sitting in the darkness, staring at the door with an expression she couldn't read.
The week passed in a blur of meetings, decisions, and late nights studying maps and reports until her eyes burned. The kingdom was stabilizing. Trade routes were reopening. Refugees were being integrated into towns and villages. The purge laws had been formally abolished, replaced with protections for the vulnerable and support systems for those who needed help. It wasn't perfect. There were still problems, still challenges, still people who resented her rule or questioned her decisions. But it was better. On the 7th day, Nixara returned to the dungeons. Darius was waiting, standing this time, his posture straight despite the months of confinement. I've made my decision, he said before she could speak. And I'll swear your oath. Serve as advisor. Help build this new kingdom of yours. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath, not quite surrender, but acceptance. Not because I believe it will work, but because I'm curious to see if you can actually pull it off. Nixara felt something release in her chest, tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. There are conditions. I assumed. You stay under guard for the first year. You don't make any decisions without council approval. And if you ever threaten anyone, if you ever try to return to the old ways, the deal is off, and you go back in this cell permanently. Acceptable. And you have to apologize, publicly, to the families of everyone who died in the purges, to the refugees you marked for execution, to everyone you hurt while trying to prove your strength. That one made him flinch. That's asking a lot. It's asking for basic accountability. You want to be part of building something new? You start by acknowledging the damage you caused. Darius was quiet for a long moment, something warring behind his eyes. Then, slowly, he nodded. Fine. I'll do it. Nixara opened the cell door, gestured for him to step out. He did, moving stiffly, blinking in the torchlight like he'd forgotten what freedom looked like. Thank you, he said quietly, and it sounded like the words cost him something. Don't thank me yet. This is going to be harder than staying locked up. Nixara started walking toward the stairs, Darius following with guards flanking him. You're going to face people who hate you, who want you dead, who'll question every word you say. And you're going to have to prove every single day that you deserve this second chance. I know. Good. Because I meant what I said. This is your one opportunity. Don't waste it. They emerged from the dungeons into sunlight that made Darius squint and shield his eyes. The spring air was warm, carrying the scent of new growth and possibility. Somewhere in the palace, children were laughing. Nixara heard it and smiled. The formal apology ceremony was scheduled for the following week, giving Darius time to prepare and giving Nixara time to brace for the inevitable backlash. Not everyone was happy about her decision. Kes thought she was being too soft. Several council members argued it was politically dangerous. The families of purge victims demanded to know why the man who'd ordered their loved ones' deaths was being given mercy. Nixara listened to all of it, acknowledged the concerns, and held firm. I'm not asking you to forgive him, she told an assembly of refugees and survivors the day before the ceremony. I'm not saying what he did was acceptable or that he deserves your forgiveness. What I'm saying is that we have a choice about what kind of kingdom we build. We can build one based on revenge and punishment, or we can try to build one based on accountability and growth. He killed my son, an older man shouted from the crowd. My 12-year-old son, and you want me to just accept that he's sorry? No, Nixara said gently. I want you to hear him apologize. I want him to face what he did, and then I want you to decide for yourself whether you can live in the same kingdom as him. If you can't, I understand. But I'm asking you to give this a chance. And if he hurts someone again? Then he goes back in the dungeons and doesn't come out. But I have to believe people can change. I have to believe we're all more than the worst thing we've ever done. Because if I don't believe that, her voice caught slightly, then what was the point of surviving? What was the point of fighting to build something better? The ceremony was held in the rebuilt throne room, packed with survivors and witnesses. Darius stood in front of them, no longer in chains, but clearly under guard, his expression carefully neutral. Nixara stood to the side, wearing her crown, but letting this moment belong to someone else. "I am Darius Khan," he began, his voice steady but quiet, "former Alpha King of the Northern Territories, and I am responsible for the deaths of over 300 people in what history will call the Purges." The room was silent, every eye fixed on him. "I ordered those deaths because I believed strength meant eliminating weakness. I believed a kingdom was only as strong as its weakest member, and that removing those members would make us safer, more powerful, more capable of defending ourselves." He paused, something flickering across his face that might have been shame. "I was wrong, completely, fundamentally wrong. Strength isn't about eliminating the vulnerable, it's about protecting them. A kingdom's power isn't measured by its warriors, but by how it treats those who can't fight. And I betrayed that principle. I betrayed you." Darius looked out at the assembled crowd, meeting eyes, not flinching away. "I can't undo what I did. Can't bring back the people I killed. Can't heal the trauma I caused. But I can stand here and acknowledge it, own it, and spend whatever time I have left trying to make amends." He took a deep breath. "I know many of you want me dead. I understand that. Some of you probably deserve the chance to kill me yourselves. But Queen Nixara has offered me an opportunity I don't deserve, a chance to help build something better than what I destroyed. I'm taking that chance, not because I think it earns forgiveness, but because maybe, if I spend the rest of my life serving instead of ruling, I can become someone who deserves to live." Silence. Then from the back of the room someone spoke. "My daughter was 6 years old when your enforcers killed her. She had a birthmark on her face that you decided made her defective." Darius turned toward the voice, a woman in her 30s with tears streaming down her face. "I can't forgive you," she continued, her voice shaking. "I will never forgive you. But if the Queen thinks you can help make sure no other parent has to bury their child for being imperfect, then I won't stand in the way." Another voice, an elderly man. "You killed my son for stealing bread to feed his siblings. I hope you remember his name. I hope it haunts you." "I do," Darius said quietly. "Mikhail, age 12. I remember all of them." More voices, one after another, sharing stories of loss and pain and damage that could never be repaired. Darius listened to all of it, didn't defend himself, didn't make excuses, just stood there and bore witness to the suffering he'd caused. When it was over, when the last person had spoken and the room fell quiet again, Nixara stepped forward. "This is what accountability looks like," she said, her voice carrying across the hall. "Not hiding from consequences, not pretending the damage didn't happen, but facing it, acknowledging it, and trying, however imperfectly, to do better." She looked at Darius, then at the assembled crowd. "We're building something new here, a kingdom where power isn't about dominance, but about service, where strength means protecting the vulnerable instead of eliminating them, where people can make terrible mistakes and still find a path to redemption." Nixara raised her voice, letting it ring with conviction. "It won't be perfect. We'll make mistakes. We'll fail sometimes. But we'll do it together and we'll keep trying and maybe, just maybe, we'll build something worth the cost." The throne room erupted in voices. Some cheering, some protesting, all of them loud and passionate and alive. Nixara stood there, wearing her crown, listening to her people argue and debate and challenge each other, and felt something she'd never expected. Pride. Not in herself, but in them. In their willingness to try something different, to take risks, to believe that change was possible. 6 months after the coronation, Shadowmere had transformed. The palace that had once been a symbol of fear and oppression now housed schools for children, training programs for adults, medical facilities for the sick and injured. The throne room where Nixara had been rejected now served as a public forum where anyone could bring grievances or proposals directly to the Queen. The refugee camps had been dismantled, replaced with permanent housing and community centers. The purge laws were gone, replaced with protections and support systems. Trade was flourishing, alliances were being rebuilt, and the kingdom was healing. It wasn't perfect. There were still problems, still resistance, still people who preferred the old ways. But it was better. Nixara stood on the palace balcony one evening, watching the sun set over the city, feeling the weight of the crown that had become familiar, if not entirely comfortable. Cassia appeared beside her, as she often did,
carrying 2 cups of spiced wine. "You did it," her grandmother said, handing her one of the cups. "Against all odds, against all logic, you actually pulled it off. We're not done yet."
Never will be. That's the thing about ruling. It's not a goal you achieve, it's a process you maintain. Cassia sipped her wine. "But you've proven something important. That power doesn't have to corrupt. That someone who was thrown away can build something worth keeping."
Nixara was quiet for a moment, thinking about everything that had happened. The rejection, the exile, the fire that had almost killed her, the refugees who'd become an army, the battle for the throne, the choice to show mercy instead of revenge. "Do you think my mother would be proud?" she asked quietly.
Cassia considered the question seriously.
"I think she'd be terrified. You're everything she tried not to be. Powerful, visible, willing to fight. But yes, I think she'd be proud. Because you took the legacy she was afraid of and turned it into something that helps people instead of just destroying them." "I still think about him sometimes," Nixara admitted. "Darius? The bond. What might have been if he hadn't rejected me. And I'm glad he did." The words felt strange but true. "If he hadn't rejected me, I'd never have discovered what I was capable of. Never have learned to embrace the fire instead of fearing it. I'd have spent my life trying to be the weak Omega he wanted instead of becoming the woman I needed to be." She touched the brand on her neck, the mark that had once been a symbol of shame, now just a scar she barely noticed. "Rejection was the worst thing that ever happened to me," Nixara said, "but it was also the best, because it forced me to become strong enough to survive it, and that strength is what let me build this." Cassia clinked her cup against Nixara's. "To rejection, then, and to becoming something better than what they wanted us to be." They drank as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of red and gold and fire. Somewhere in the city, someone was singing. Somewhere, a child was laughing. Somewhere, people who had been thrown away were building new lives, new futures, new possibilities. And in the palace, a woman who'd been publicly humiliated, branded, and exiled stood wearing a crown she'd never wanted, ruling a kingdom she'd never asked for, and smiled. Because the girl who'd knelt in this palace and begged for mercy was gone. In her place stood a queen who'd learned that the strongest thing you could be wasn't someone who never broke. It was someone who broke and rebuilt themselves into something better. Someone who took the fire that was supposed to destroy them and used it to forge a new world. Someone who proved that rejection wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. And this time, when Nixara Vale walked through her kingdom, when she looked at the people she'd saved and the lives she'd changed and the future she was building, no one dared to reject her. Not because they feared her power, though they did, but because they believed in her vision, and that belief, that hope, that willingness to try something different, that was more powerful than any fire, any bond, any crown. That was what would last. Years later, when people told the story of the rejected queen, they wouldn't talk about the humiliation or the branding or the exile. They'd talk about what came after, about the woman who turned rejection into revolution, who walked through fire and came out sovereign, who proved that the strongest rulers weren't the ones who never fell. They were the ones who fell and got back up and helped others rise with them. And when little girls who felt weak and worthless and unwanted heard that story, they'd understand something important, that their worth wasn't determined by who accepted them. It was determined by who they chose to become. And that choice, that power to define yourself despite what others said, that was something no rejection could ever take away. That was the legacy Nixara Vale left behind. Not a kingdom of fear and dominance, but a kingdom of second chances, of redemption, of the radical idea that everyone, even the rejected, even the broken, even the ones the world had thrown away, deserved the opportunity to become something more than what they'd been told they were. And that, in the end, was worth more than any crown.